All right, good afternoon, council members and members of the public, both with us in person and online. I'm Megan Marshall. I'm the Executive Officer for the California Interagency Council on Homelessness, and I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you for your commitment in joining our efforts to ending and preventing homelessness in California. We truly could not do it without certainly the folks in the room with us and the passion of the folks also in the room and online. A few reminders before we begin. As Cody said, this is a 3-hour meeting. Our apologies, but very important topic, lots to be covered. And while we'll do our best to keep this time frame, there's a possibility we may go over. So if you are here in person, certainly at home, do as you feel necessary, but feel free to stand up, stretch, move about the room. I'll certainly be doing that myself. So prior to this meeting, council members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. We will try to leave some time for council members to ask questions towards the end of the meeting, but if we run out of time, please feel free to email us and we'll have that contact information available after the meeting. I need to get used to managing my own slides at this point. All right, so it's okay. It's a blessing and a curse. So quick review of our agenda. We'll call to order as we always do, tribal land acknowledgement and roll call, a review and a vote on our consent calendar for prior meeting, council co-chair opening remarks, a few updates for myself, and then to the exciting portion of our agenda with bold action plan activity share outs. We have not ghosts, it's not spooky season just quite yet. We have guests joining us from our racial equity work group, and then we'll end with general public comments. All right, so during today's meeting, as I mentioned, there will be an opportunity for public comment. We'll allow for a maximum of 2 minutes for each. We welcome all public comments and feedback. However, due to the structure of the meeting that we're in, we may not be able to respond to them. For this reason, if you have specific questions, again, we'll have our contact information available at the end of the meeting. So with that, the California Interagency Council on Homelessness is hereby called to order on this day, September 5th, 2024 at, looks like 1:03 p.m., depending upon which clock you look at, but 1:03 feels right to me. All right, with that, I will turn it over to Vivila for our tribal land acknowledgement.
Thank you. We wish to acknowledge that
Vivila, give us a quick second.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay. Can you try one more time, V?
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you better.
Okay, great. Okay. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisenan people, the Patwin Wintun people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we're joining from in our virtual community, we're all on California Native American land. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivila. So will CalICH staff member Claire Bannerman please call the roll?
Thank you. Okay, so this is the attendance roll call for the council. We need a majority of members or a quorum to hold this meeting. Council members, after I call your name, please say present or here. Apologies if I mispronounce any names. Designees, please state your name and which council member you are attending for when I call their name. All right, Tamika Moss. Dr. Galley. Tomas Aragon. Michelle Boss. Stephanie Clendenin.
Hi, Chris Edens for Councilmember Stephanie Clendenin.
Thank you, Chris. Susan Damaris. Kim Johnson.
Present.
Thank you. Tina Johnson Hall. Thank you, Gail. Margot Cashel. Veronica Lewis. Jeffrey McCumber. William McGee. Kaina Pereira. Rebecca Rawan O'Shaughnessy. Lindsay Sin. Tony Tavares, Gustavo Velasquez, Nancy Ward. Thank you. Marina Wyant and Joe Xavier. Thank you. We have a quorum. I will move us along to the next agenda item. Sorry. Okay, so this is the consent calendar for regular items that need to be approved by the council via a vote. The council may engage in discussion on any items in the consent calendar if you so choose. We have one item, the adoption of the June 12th council meeting summary. Are there any comments from council members? Okay, great. Because this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open up for public comment. Please keep comments to the items on the consent calendar only. If your comment is not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for general public comment at the end of this meeting. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon. For those joining us by telephone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. And when you are instructed to unmute, you will press *6. Are there any comments from the members of the public? Okay. And then are there any online? No? Okay, great. There are no comments. Would anyone like to motion to approve the meeting summary? Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. So we will go to a vote. We will be voting through raised hands. So we will do yes, no, and abstain. So I'll just ask for you to keep your hand up for just a moment so we can record. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay, all council members who are voting yes. Okay, great. So. All right, those voting no? And those voting to abstain? Okay. Wonderful, thank you. I will now pass it back to Cody to Cody to facilitate the next agenda item.
My favorite job. I will now pass it to the co-chairs to give their opening remarks. Welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for joining us. So Secretary Moss, if you'd like to begin.
All right. Thank you, Cody. Good afternoon, everyone, members of the public, council members. I am really excited that we are continuing our work today on the 3-year statewide action plan. I want to just thank you all so much for leaning in, digging deep with the staff. I know we've all been putting a lot of work in, but it's really because this is critically important for all of us. It's really giving us the roadmap and clarity for how we're going to do this work together. And I know Dr. Galley and I certainly, as well as the governor, really want to focus on action and results. And we've been talking about that since I joined the council as co-chair back in March. And today I think it's a really good opportunity for us to dig into some details and talk about some of the goals that the staff has been organizing for us to really quantify our progress, right? We know that so much of the work that we are doing collectively is targeting folks experiencing homelessness and trying to reach our goals, but we know we have to dig deeper and we need to be able to have some accountability and action-oriented results that we're all looking for. So that's what today is about. I feel like we often use language like bold and action, and they kind of mean nothing unless you actually do them. And so that's the part I'm really excited about today, is to really understand from you all how courageous do we want to be as a council in really moving forward this administration's commitment to this work. So really excited to dig in and roll up our sleeves this afternoon. I want to thank the Racial Equity Board, Council, Committee, Working Group. See what I mean? There's so many words. for the for working with us. You know, I often say to my team, racial equity is not just about highlighting the disproportionate impacts. It's about figuring out how to shift those and recognizing the structural environment that they exist within and targeting that. So really excited to hear from that work group about all the great work they've been up to. And in the spirit of brevity, I'm going to pass it over to my co-chair, Dr. Gelly.
That means I don't have to be brief. Thank you, Tamika. No, just I'll echo Tamika's gratitude to all of you. We've pulled on your time over the last couple of months in ways that maybe you didn't expect, because this matters a ton. This matters to the governor. He does lean in his important way with us, with the partners across the state, because this really is an issue of grave importance to him. And I think I can never channel him perfectly, but my guess is if he were here, he would say every single one of you was hired, lest our two people who are not on the state payroll. We're hired to solve this problem, and that your jobs depend on it in a way. So I look at my own directors that I have a privilege of working with, and you that are here, and even those who aren't, you've all managed these amazing strategy projects and implemented things. I mean, Susan, you have sort of a one-in-a-kind master plan for aging that all the other states in the nation are stealing. Michelle, your department has done things with Medicaid that most other states don't get past the whiteboard in doing, and you're implementing them. Tomas, you just helped lead through the world's hardest 3 years of public health period. If we bring that same resolve to this action plan and take it really personally, I think we see a different result. So how do we make sure that it doesn't end up being bold actions on paper and nothing in action? I think that's what this day and days to come are really about. And I think it's important, to your point about the racial equity work group, that they are, in my mind, one of the clear manifestations about what's so ugly and tough about this problem, that it plays out in such predictable ways because of the structural features of the way we do systems and the way our communities, sadly, are structured. And I think that we can start rethinking that here in this action plan. So just implore you to kind of wear that today and in the future as we try to do this, because you all have done amazing things in your own departments, but we got to own this like that was your number one priority. On a lot more important, well, not more important, but mundane, but important things, just highlight that our agency, really Michelle's department, is starting to really lean in on the BHSA reforms and what that looks like on the ground, talking about, hey, how do we take this idea that the voters passed about housing interventions and making them real? How are we rethinking some of the tools that will augment the housing that people will go into? So some recent papers released around transitional rent, public comments due soon, webinars around what this looks like, not just for state people to be informed and figure out how you plug into it, but also for the public. So feeling like we're building the momentum to that 2026 date when all of this is kind of the law of the land and the way the work happens. So a lot of gratitude to Michelle and her team for leading on these things. So not as brief as I'd hope, but hopefully keeps us on time. So thank you for being here.
Secretary, in fact, we're a little bit early, so Secretary Moss, if you wanted to take a minute to highlight the wonderful team that you have, I'm just kidding. All right, so thank you, co-chairs, for those words of inspiration. I have but one update for you all today. As you are all aware, on June 28th, the Supreme Court ruled that enforcing laws prohibiting camping on public property is not cruel and unusual punishment. As a result, local governments across the country may now freely enforce laws regulating camping on public property. In response to that Supreme Court decision, Governor Newsom issued Executive Order N-124, which directs state agencies and departments to move with urgency and compassion in addressing encampments on state property. It is also an encouragement for local jurisdictions to develop similar policies to address camping on public property within their jurisdictions. So as the state's leader in ending and preventing homelessness, Cal ICH was identified in that executive order to support state agencies and departments, as well as our local communities in implementing these policies in a way that is humane, acts with compassion, and again, that sense of urgency. So in response to that call for Cal ICH, we developed a two-part webinar and we'll be hosting communities of practice over the next several weeks. The first webinar was hosted on August 22nd and focused on the intent of the order and gave local jurisdictions the opportunity to ask questions and share mostly their concerns. We had over 500 participants from up and down the state. We had code enforcement entities, we had public works entities. It was a great show of the partners at the table who we don't typically see, but who are absolutely necessary when adopting and implementing similar policies. So recording of that presentation and corresponding materials are available on our website. The second webinar focused on best practices and partnerships that are critical to addressing encampments, but unfortunately due to technical difficulties, the second webinar was recorded without an audience and will be posted on Cal ICH's website next week, along with instructions on how to further engage with Cal ICH on that particular topic. And as I said, we'll be hosting communities of practice, highlighting cities and counties who are working together to identify the things that are working, to talk about the things that are not working, and how Cal ICH can better support what's so critically needed at the local level. So, but with that, we look forward to keeping the council, our advisory committee, and our lived experience advisory board informed on this matter. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Cody to move us on through the agenda. Before doing that, I will be responsible and move the slides along.
Thank you. And now I'm wishing that this slide didn't say bold on it. No, just kidding. Thank you all. No, it's good. Bold is the word that we're using to get us to the vision, right? So as we've mentioned to, I think most of you at this point, the first part of today's meeting is really meant to be a follow-up on our conversation from July, right? Where in July, we came together around the action plan. We said, here are the goals that we're putting out. Then we got in small groups to share, like, what is it that we can do individually and in partnership, right, to really get us to those goals. I think Dr. Galley was very clear in his focus and saying we need to be focused on, if we're going to set these goals, we need to like have the activities and the actions that are going to push us towards those goals, right? So since then, we've been working with each of you and your staff to come up with the list of activities to include in the plan that are going to help us hopefully achieve those goals, right? So additionally, after that meeting, we heard from a lot of you saying, hey, it was really helpful to hear what Department of State Hospitals does or Department of Aging, right? Like even just getting to hear examples of what each other do was a big help. So we've designed this to sort of do both of those things, follow up on both of those things. So the first thing that we're going to do is, as you all know, you have all prepared a little bit of homework to share one bold new activity you're including in the plan that helps us get to one of our plan's goals. And then we are going to have a discussion after that led by Dr. Kushel and Councilmember Lewis about, you know, taking a step back and saying collectively as a group, right, is this getting us to where we want to be realistically? The things that we're hearing, the types of work we're hearing, is that moving us towards these bold goals that we have set out? We'll talk a little bit more about the goals before we have that discussion. But the idea, I think Dr. Aragon put it, we have to like take off our department hats, right, and look as a collective at this work to understand if it's moving us where we want to go. So now I'm going to talk about logistics, which is my favorite thing. And this is where I get to get really serious. So each of you gets to share, which we are really excited about. However, the fact that we have 20 people on our council is both a blessing, and it means that if everyone goes over time by a certain amount of time, it really adds up. So I'm going to introduce Brina. Brina here is our wonderful staff person who has agreed to help be the timekeeper and hold up a sign when you have 1 minute left and when you are out of time. It's very scary. I know the intimidation factor is high here. So everyone has 2 minutes to speak, to share their activity, right? The idea is that you're just really giving a high level overview of what it is that you're contributing and what goal it's connected to. And we will be, Brina will give you a mean look if you're going over your time. No, just kidding. So we're just gonna go around and share that, and then I will share a little bit more about the goals that we've put together, and how we've adjusted them since we last met slightly. And as Secretary Moss said, sort of put numbers to those, and then we will have that discussion that I talked about. So any questions before we jump in? Great, love it. Okay, so just as a reminder, and you will see more about these goals after we all share, but this is how you saw them last time, and the general goals have remained the same, right? The goals that we have in this plan are to create more housing, to reduce the inflow into homelessness, to help more people leave unsheltered homelessness, to help more people move into permanent housing, to improve the connections to health and social services, and to ensure that people don't become homeless again or don't return to experiencing homelessness. So these are sort of the general goals that we have. We're going to dive into those a little bit after, but just for your sort of as a reminder, when you're talking about your activity, you can, look at these and say which one or ones it is connected to. And the prompt, as you know, is what is one bold new action that you are including in the action plan that is directly connected to one of the plan's goals. So without further ado, I think I'm going to start just on the end here with Councilmember Damaris, if you don't mind, and you'll just pass the mic around, and then we'll go to the folks online. And for those online, I will send you a little message when you have 1 minute left and when you are out of time. So that's how we'll do that.
I am so happy to start, Cody. Thank you. Get the clock going. All right. So for the California Department of Aging, the goal that and now it's not feeling too bold after our opening remarks. Our focus is to improve connections to health and social services. The challenge that we identified is older adults are the fastest growing demographic of individuals experiencing homelessness. And many area agencies on aging and housing continuums of care are not aware of or have very limited cross-referral relationships to link service resources across the aging, housing, and Medi-Cal managed care networks serving older adults. The action that we propose is the California Department of Aging will facilitate connections across AAAs, the area agencies on aging, and the COCs, county staff, and Medi-Cal managed care plans to help align services for older adults who are at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness. Our goal is to raise awareness of resources and supports available to older adults at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness, including strategies for outreach, identification, and service connection. To achieve this goal, we will begin engaging our AAAs in local collaboratives with COCs and health plans and drive participation in CalAIM through a Medi-Cal training series. The title is Partnerships to Support Older Adults. It goes fast, everybody. And this effort is supported by the Archstone Foundation and the Corporation for Supportive Housing with technical assistance provided by CDA. So we're forming a learning collaborative. And I'll just add, we might put in a plug for legal services, isn't often included in social services, but that's a big unmet need that we've identified.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Rebecca O'Shaughnessy, representing really the higher education segment, especially the California community colleges. First of all, thank you so much. our calls. So thank you to make this conversation. For us, what I'm very, very excited about it is really diving into data, analyzing data regarding our pilot program as well as our basic needs programs. So our housing, rapid rehousing program is a pilot program across over 20 colleges, but we have basic needs centers across our entire system, so 115 colleges. So we're looking at that as a holistic infrastructure to kind of deliver services. So we want to really analyzing data to examine kind of gaps in addressing the needs of students, especially around through the equity frame to identify inequities and really support our service delivery and maximizing program impact. So what we are, it will really contribute to most of the goals here, especially 4 and 5. How do we continue to support students moving to temporary housing and then permanent housing, as well as connection to health and social services? So Basic Needs Center is that nexus for us to do that work. So, and we typically have an open access type of approach. But then when you have open access, then that's a place where you see a lot of systemic inequity will show up, right? Just because we serve everyone doesn't mean we serve everyone equitably. So that's the place where we're going to dive in, specifically looking at data and see any kind of specific interventions that we need to strengthen to really accomplish that goal. Yeah, as well. Oh, yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tony Tavares, Caltrans Director, and I think our department really hits multiple goals in the work that we're doing. And as Megan mentioned, with the governor's executive order, Caltrans was called out, as well as many of the other Cal ICH partners here. Our process isn't just to remove encampments. That's not the main goal. Our goal is to connect people to services, connect people to housing, and rehouse these individuals, these priority populations. And so I'm really proud of the team that I have working statewide. We have just recently done some additional outreach and realizing that tribal populations are now homeless on our state right away. And so we're reaching out to our Native American Advisory Committee, which Caltrans hosts, and meeting with all the tribal leaders and governments throughout the state to identify what type of services do they need, what type of connections can we provide to them. And so we're connecting these tribal populations to those services and helping them to leave homelessness and get into transitional housing and other benefits there. In addition, one more point I want to make. We have been very fortunate to be able to bring many of these individuals who have been experiencing homelessness in the past or justice impacted and provided career opportunities to them. So not just a job, but a career where there's upward mobility, a living wage, and they are able to then stand on their own 2 feet and continue with their housing and their goals of life going forward. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Marina Wyan, Executive Director with the Tax Credit Allocation Committee. And our goal is also data focused to build a more robust database to be able to better analyze the portfolio. We have a lot of data on the front end, but we also lack a lot of data on the outcomes of residents. And that's another sort of sub goal within the data goal. We monitor properties on an ongoing basis. But we don't do much other than ensuring the compliance. And so I really want to start looking more critically on what we're seeing when our inspectors are going out and monitoring properties to ensure that what we do in our program on the front end is in the best interest of residents moving forward and prospective tenants.
Good afternoon, Gustavo Velasquez from HCD. My action goes straight to number 1, creating more housing. And some people were asking last time about that number, 2.5 million new homes. That is how short we are in the state of California to meet the needs of all Californians across the income spectrum. And today I want to share how HCD is working towards achieving that number. We have planning and enforcement responsibilities to ensure that every local government plans for enough affordable housing. Every 8 years, the state sets a target for the number of homes that are to be created across income levels. This is called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. You may have heard that acronym. Then once that RHNA number is set at the statewide level, every jurisdiction has to set a number for their own. This goes into every jurisdiction general plan. An element of that plan is called the housing element or housing plan. And that's how it's divided. The 2.5 million is divided just across the entire state. But it doesn't end there. We have to also implement accountability reforms passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Hundreds of bills that the governor has signed into law. We do that through a unit at HCD called the HCD Housing and Homelessness Accountability Unit. And the purpose is, yes, to educate and provide technical assistance to each jurisdiction. But if they don't meet their state law obligations, we will go with the Attorney General and take these jurisdictions to court. And by the way, we win every time.
That's hard to follow, Director Velasquez. Thank you very much. So California Department of Veterans Affairs, although we have not yet submitted our bold actions to the council, so I won't pretend that we have. I know our team is thinking hard about this. Reason being is we have a number of programs right now that I think really apply to this bold action here. Of course, I'd be remiss in mentioning the first goal and the work that many of the partners around this table have achieved with the passage of Proposition 1. So out of that, in partnership with Housing Community Development Department, we'll be building housing specifically for veterans experiencing homelessness with underlying behavioral health and substance use disorder needs. So that should equate to about 2,600 units just for veterans alone. So that's pretty significant. The other is really pursuing policies that are going to prevent our veterans from falling into homelessness in certain ways. And that may be things like, how do we ensure that disability compensation isn't considered in something like safety net programs, for example? So we're looking at those policies that we would be considering to see how we can really prevent the first step, which is the entrance into homelessness for our veterans, but more to come from us.
Good afternoon, everyone. It probably comes as no surprise that folks releasing from prison do much better if they have jobs, housing, are drug-free, and we also have a high percentage of our population with a serious mental illness releasing from prison. So CDCR's bold new action is strengthening access and connections to housing, health, and social services by leveraging Cal ICH as an intermediary to establish formal partnerships with other state departments that operate relevant programs. This includes formalizing partnerships to establish referral pathways from CDCR to community-based resources through programs delivered by the Department of Healthcare Services, the Department of Social Services, Cal ICH and Continuum of Care to access housing navigation and placement services, and the Department of Rehabilitation's programs and services. As part of these efforts, CDCR aims to connect individuals who are identified pre-release as being at risk of homelessness or who become unhoused while on parole or probation supervision to the community-based resources as identified in the programs listed above. Thank you.
I'm Tomas Aragon, CDPH Director. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you how we're thinking about it at CDPH. So we're thinking it in two ways. What do we control? So we control all the programs that we have in CDPH. So we're incorporating homelessness into our equity strategy to make sure that programs across the health department are addressing homelessness as part of their equity thinking. And we're starting first with two major areas. One is we're developing within our Office of Health Equity a tribal affairs section to work in that area. And the other one is with maternal, child, and adolescent health, because we work with local health departments where we have people in the field going to homes and working with the most vulnerable families in California, so we can have an impact there. And of course, and then supporting our local health jurisdictions on how they interface with other departments when they're dealing with homelessness. So impacting in the home, in the field, providing public health services in the field, and of course, continue to improve our ability to look at data and surveillance to improve, to really support everybody here around these issues. Thank you.
So I also have not submitted our bold action plan, but we will be focusing on 2 and 6, which is to reduce homelessness through inflow and make sure people don't become homeless again through workforce development. And how we would like to do that is through our connections to other state departments to make sure that we connect them to the workforce regions, both the jobs first regions and the regional planning units through the federal system. We already have some existing partnerships like with CDCR for our P2E program. So we are already serving reentry folks and we would like to make that bolder. And I will be meeting with Amy Casillas to do that soon. So our big way of achieving these is making sure there's connections for departments, making sure that individuals have connections to local workforce, because that's where there's a lot of confusion sometimes. And also letting people know when we have money that is available for workforce development. I think we talked before about in the goals, there wasn't really any workforce stuff in there. And so now with us being active on the council, we can provide funding to get some of our folks trained, get them a new, a livable wage. We have high road training partners. We have HRCC's high road construction careers, which we will be working with Caltrans to do. So there's a lot of opportunities coming up, but basically through connections into the workforce system, getting people skilled, trained, and getting a family making wage.
Good afternoon, Joe Xavier, Department of Rehabilitation. So we look at this from sort of 2 different lenses. One is that when we think of a whole person approach, we're thinking about our local service delivery provider systems and doing 2 things on that front. One, ensuring that these systems are coordinating across all of the other systems so that they can get the individuals connected, but equally important to ensure that the local systems are aware of the other programs and services, right? Because when we talk about a whole person approach, it doesn't work if one system doesn't know how to connect that individual or where there's a program that individual can benefit that they need. The other one is on the employment services side, right? So as part of that local service connection, we need to build employment into that. But one of the things that I think we need to continue to pay attention to, I'm talking too fast, is on the, how do we prevent people from losing their jobs? Individuals that are at risk of losing their jobs, how do we get them connected to services? And how do we get the employer to start identifying those individuals and getting them connected to services? Because otherwise, we just keep addressing the people that have lost their homes. How do we prevent that from happening is I think we need more attention to.
Hi there, Michelle Boss with the Department of Healthcare Services. And as discussed, Proposition 1 is really the most important thing I think that the department is working on right now. And related to housing and homelessness, there's a 30% allocation to locals related to housing interventions. And this represents about $1 billion in ongoing annual revenue for housing interventions such as rental subsidies, operating subsidies, shared housing. And so we're in the process of working with all of our partners and stakeholders and designing that policy, designing the mechanisms to really understand and be transparent for how those dollars are being used, and really providing the ability to really track what we're getting with these dollars. And so another key piece is just the kind of the framework and the technical assistance to ensure that those dollars are maximized and leveraged with a lot of the other efforts that we've talked about here, in particular CalAIM, one of our new community supports that's pending before the federal government, the transitional rent, and how we link and really provide for that continuum of housing services for individuals with behavioral health needs. So top of mind for us.
Good afternoon. I'm Gail Tatayama from the California Housing Finance Agency, attending on behalf of Executive Director Tina Johnson Hall. So when we thought about the BOLT action plan, we actually approached it also looking at the Cal ICH guiding principles, because we want to tie it together, and also ask ourselves, what have we not done yet at Cal HFA? So with the two guiding principles, we saw the pursuing racial equity and justice and increasing access to resources for California's tribal communities. Those were the two guiding principles we used. And the action plan that the goal that we have linked it to was create more housing, but more so getting people more into housing, not just creating housing. So what is our plan? So our plan is to have tribal engagement and listening sessions with California Native American tribes. And why is that? We try to align also with our current strategic goals and initiatives for College FA. And one of the goals that we have is to co-host a listening session with the tribes to understand their homeownership and financing needs and offer technical assistance to access resources available to the tribes. And after that, once we've listened to the tribes, we'll create an outreach and education campaign for the Native Americans. We want to go out to them and talk to them about what is available for them. So for us, we believe that the listening session will be a venue for a dialogue between the State Housing Finance Agency and the Native American tribes. The consultation will pave the way to better understand the needs of the Native Americans and explore opportunities where College FA homeownership programs can be accessible to the communities. Thank you.
Is it on? Can you hear me? So my name is Gina Busari Harrington, and I'm speaking for Director Ward. The Office of Emergency Services has several different roles, and with disasters and also with victims of violent crime. So we look at victims as a victim of a disaster or a victim of a violent crime. So I'm going to focus kind of just a little bit on both. Our goals and our action plan are ongoing because we all know is when a disaster hits, we're all on board. We try to prepare, we try to respond, and we definitely have a lot of recovery afterwards. So one of the things we do during a disaster is we do have what's called the Priority Populations Task Force, and that convenes with HHS and DHS. And what that task force does, it coordinates state resources, identifies and addresses unmet needs, closes gaps, and ensures comprehensive operational preparedness and response to those at greatest risk, including people who are unhoused. And then I want to focus a little bit about the victim services programs, which is victims of violent crime. These are ongoing programs that we have, and we have several that focus on the unhoused. So we provide local organizations, local government and community-based organizations with funding for shelter and supportive services to unhoused victims of domestic violence and human trafficking, victims and survivors. And some of these programs I just want to mention are our Domestic Violence Assistance Program, our Domestic Violence Housing First Program, our Homeless Youth and Exploitation Program, our Homeless Youth Emergency and Services Housing Program, our Transitional Housing and Homeless Youth Emergency Services, and our Human Trafficking. So we have several that focus on the unhoused at Cal OES.
Great, thank you. Now we're going to go to the two folks online, starting with Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Kim Johnson, Department of Social Services. I think thematically here, from what I'm hearing from some of the other members this afternoon, Department of Social Services wants to focus on delivering flexible housing and homelessness programs that are integrated. That's our underscore integrated with the social safety net and tailored to the needs of some of the most vulnerable populations experiencing homelessness and housing instability, including families experiencing poverty, child welfare involved families, vulnerable older adults, including those engaged with the adult protective services and individuals with disabilities. So appreciate that that's a thematic piece. For us, it is proven we have the outcomes. We actually have the data and evaluation that by doing so, this works. And it not only works for sustained permanent housing solutions, where we see in most of those population-focused programs, retention of housing 6 months post-exit of the program in the upward 85% of those participating, but it also really reduces inflow into homelessness. And I want to appreciate Dr. Cashel, who is also helping us with the team at UCSF, evaluating our Home Safe program, which is focused on those engaged in adult protective services. That's highlighted in the interim findings that Home Safe appears to have stabilized those who would have otherwise become homeless. So again, it's not only on the permanent housing component, but it's also reducing inflow. For us, this integration also addresses what we heard Dr. Cashel raise around having that one economic incident that has pushed someone into homelessness, right? It gives the stability to support and avoid that in that space too. So for it's bold from our perspective also, in it being a way to effectively end homelessness for those most vulnerable populations and those with greatest needs. So we look forward to partnering with all of you and being intentional on this integration effort. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And then we'll go to Chris Edens, who I think is also here. Yep.
Hi, yeah, Chris Edens, Department of State Hospitals, representing Director Stephanie Clendenin. So there's several different new actions or that goals that we are including in this year's plan. Would say that today I'm focusing on goal number 2, reducing inflow into homelessness, and the action being optimizing discharge planning strategies for harder to house populations to ensure successful returns to the community from DSH settings. And so there's sort of 2 areas of opportunity here. One for patients who are directly discharging from our state hospitals and back into the community, as well as patients who are incompetent to stand trial and are released from our DSH setting back into the county jails and then subsequently released into the community after their case is resolved. For those that are directly discharging from our state hospitals to the community, planning typically begins very early, but there are a contingent of justice-involved patients where we may receive a court order for immediate release, which gives us very little room and time to arrange for an appropriate placement. And this increases the risk of homelessness. And so this is made even more difficult when the patient may have a previous charge or a history related to, say, a sex offense or an arson charge in their history, for example. And there are very, very few providers who will accept these individuals. So the way we're sort of thinking about it here at the Department of State Hospitals is how do we not only increase awareness, but to educate and encourage more community providers and specifically target our funding opportunities to develop additional housing sites within their program networks to accept and serve these individuals. So we have just more options available to us and to our partners as well. And another way that we're thinking about this really is from the lens of being direct treatment providers. You know, are there training and technical assistance opportunities that we can offer to help support the community workforce prepare and feel comfortable with serving this population? So again, increasing the likelihood that folks won't get denied for placement. And with respect to the incompetent to stand trial population, we know that more than 60% of the individuals that are referred to their Department of State Hospitals as IST are homeless at the time of their arrest, with the majority of those individuals being and coming from an unsheltered homeless status. And for this population, we know also that a majority do not go on to serve a prison term, but they do remain at the local level. And so if charges are dropped, there is, again, an increased likelihood of homelessness at the time that they're released back to the community. So we're a bit disadvantaged from the perspective of when we're releasing an individual who's IST, they're going back to the county jail setting, and we don't know necessarily when that individual's case may be resolved, then released back to the community. And so we're thinking about ways that we can better partner with our county behavioral health and various providers on ensuring folks don't slip through the cracks. So thanks very much.
Great. All right. You all did, I think you took that, I think we were too scary about the timing. You did a really good job. Thank you all. I know it's hard to be brief in all of this work because there's a ton that goes into every single one of those things you all just mentioned. Also, big thank you to Brina. It is, let me tell you, not easy to stand up here and stare at all of you and tell you to stop talking. So thank you, Brina, for doing that. So now I am going to share a little bit before we jump into the discussion about the goals, because we have adjusted them based on our conversations since we all last talked. As I said before, the goals are still fundamentally the same, but we've sort of rethought how they fit together, and we've filled in all of those blanks where there were blanks or X's with numbers that I will say right now are very drafty and are in a draft form, so they could change as time goes on, depending on different conversations, but really meant to provide something for you all to look at and react to when, put a number behind what it means to be quote unquote bold. So the way we're thinking about this is that truly, if we want to set an ultimate goal for the state, is that we're reaching functional zero. Our homelessness is at functional zero, right? Which means that you have a housing placement for every person served. So this ratio is something we looked at last time, but it's number of people exiting to permanent housing compared to number of people served. And so functional zero, right, would be a bed for a housing placement for every person served. Additional information about functional zero, it's defined differently in different places, but generally you want it to be within 30 days of someone experiencing homelessness, right, that they get a housing placement. So if we're dreaming big, if we're thinking bold, right, that's ultimately where we want to get to. So what we've done within each of these goals is we've listed sort of individual sort of ultimate goals, which you'll see, and I'll call out, or North Stars as they're sometimes called, for each of these individual goals. And in order to be bold, we decided through the scope of this plan through 2027, our goal is to get halfway to our sort of ultimate goal for each of these. So you will see what that looks like in just a second. But again, as we talked about last time, right, each of these goals focuses on addressing profound racial inequities and other disparities, specifically among communities identifying as Native American, American Indian, or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and Black or African American, right? Because we see in the data, these are the communities with the highest disproportionalities. So we want to keep calling that out and understanding what work it takes, which we will get to talk about a little bit later, to actually address and get rid of those disparities. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these goals again. We've reordered these first two, so apologies that the numbering is now changed. But we thought, if our ultimate goal is to move towards functional zero, put that at the top, right? So that ratio, we want to eventually get it to 1-to-1, but for the scope of this plan, this 3-year plan, we want to reduce the ratio of people exiting homelessness to permanent housing each year to people entering or returning to homelessness services to 1-to-2. So that, just as a translation, is 1 housing placement for every 2 people served in the system. Right now, in calendar year 2023, our ratio is 1-to-3.8. So for every person exiting housing, we serve 3.8 people. And so to get halfway to our goal of that ratio of 1-to-1, right, you can see the ultimate goal here. That would be 1-to-2. So this is the big bold numbers part. So just bear with me for a second. Goal number 2, create more housing. So this is planned for the creation of more than 940,000 homes, with no less than 390,000 of those meeting the needs of low and very low income households. The ultimate goal here, right, as set by the statewide housing plan, is 2.5 million homes by 2030. with no less than 1 million of those for low and very low income households. And then the baseline data we have so far is that since 2022, there have been 500,000, just over 500,000 units submitted for development, and 81,000 of those being for low and very low income units. So if we're trying to get to our ultimate goal of 2.5 million homes, these are the numbers that we set. We have already talked to Councilmember Velasquez about the need to refine these numbers further. So we will be in talks with HCD about that. But as just a sense, right, of where we want to get to through the scope of this plan. And just a few examples to share, right, just so you all have a sense of like where your work fits in. So for goal number 1, right, moving towards functional zero, this is sort of our overall goal that would be affected both by the increased housing placements, but also by the prevention work, right? So HCD's work with the behavioral health infrastructure bond to support the development of permanent supportive housing for veterans and other individuals at risk of homelessness, right? This fits into that first goal. CDCR and CalVet's work to expand community reentry programs for veterans and others transitioning out of correction settings to housing. This also fits in there. DOR's work to support renters from being evicted and homeowners from facing foreclosure for supporting individuals with disabilities to stay in their homes, right? That sort of prevention work fits in here. And then for goal number 2, for create more housing, right? Examples such as HCD's Home Key Plus program to create more permanent supportive housing across the state, Callie Tafe's work on the Section 811 project rental assistance, and TCAC's continued administration of the affordable housing tax credits, right? All of that fits into the creation of more housing, as you heard when folks shared. So I'm gonna, oh yeah, please, Councilmember Doris, yeah, feel free to interrupt me. We're gonna get to these other goals too, but feel free to jump in.
On this goal, we talk about homes, and when I think of homes, I think of, you know, building from scratch, an apartment unit or a house. Our second bold goal was around shared housing. So and then in the right hand, we talk about units instead of homes. So can you define for us what is a home for purposes of this goal?
Yes, that is a good question. And that is a good call out that we should be using the same labels on the things that we're measuring. So thank you for that. Gustavo, I don't know if you want to speak to exactly what you all are measuring there, but happy to pass it to you.
Yes, thank you. Preservation is preservation shared models are part of the equation. They're not contemplated here because this is based on the new housing needs. So the projections is based on population growth, economic activity. We get involved with demographers and Department of Finance. So this is basically, we're contemplating new homes when we are talking about RENA, which these numbers come from. However, just a reaction on the numbers is that when we say 1 million, nearly 1 million of the 2.5 million new homes that we need, that includes moderate income households. This is what we were discussing before the meeting, and I would suggest that for the purposes of this council, we should probably be focused on the homes for acutely extremely low, very low income households. And so the number, I suggest we look with our data unit about adjusting that. But it is, to your point, it is new homes. We should include numbers, not in this, but we can, and we do have numbers in terms of shared models or preservation that we should talk about.
And for just to add to that as well, right? So for other types of programs, right, where you are like those potentially that are not for new homes, but that are more voucher programs, right? Those would be measured under this goal number 4, moving people into housing, right? So those might not be new housing units created, but they are new opportunities for people to move into housing. And those would be captured in the exits to permanent housing in our data.
Can I ask a question? So on the new housing, so what we're talking about is single family homes and multifamily homes combined? And are we talking about home ownership or are we talking about purely rental? All of it?
I think
So have we mapped out the state of California as far as where the needs are more prevalent in what areas, where we're focusing, where those new created homes are going to want to be as a state?
Yes.
Has that been looked at?
For we can go as low as neighborhood census tract. That number can be broken down by every region, jurisdiction, community.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to keep us going through these next few. So these are in the same order, so should hopefully less confusing. But goal number 3 here is help more people leave unsheltered homelessness. And the 3-year goal we have here is increase by 70% the total number of people who leave unsheltered homelessness to either emergency shelter, interim housing, or permanent housing, with our ultimate goal, right, being of placing everyone experiencing unsheltered homelessness in a sheltered setting. So I think this is something we talked about at one of our last meetings, was like, we want to know what are we trying to get to fundamentally? And so we're trying to list that here as well. The current baseline data for this goal is that just over 98,000 people in 2023 who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness moved into a sheltered setting. So the goal here would be to increase that number by 70%. And examples of programs that are getting us towards that goal, right? The Encampment Resolution Fund program to ensure people living in encampments can be effectively housed, that is currently being implemented by HCD. DHCS's work on the Behavioral Health Bridge Housing Program to address the immediate housing and treatment needs of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Community colleges, along with the other higher ed segments, working to promote and administer emergency housing services available to students experiencing homelessness. And then Cal OES's work facilitating the Priority Populations Task Force, right, which addresses the needs of people experiencing homelessness during emergencies.
We should also be providing you statistics on our transitional housing and putting those that are unhoused in homes, whether they're temporary or not.
Definitely, yes.
So I need to talk to you about that.
Great. I love it. And then goal number 4 here, so help more people move into housing. I mentioned that briefly. The goal here is increase by 89% the total number of people who move into permanent housing, with, as we talked about before, the ultimate goal being have a permanent housing placements for everyone served. So in 2023, we placed just over 73,000 people into permanent housing. And so in order to get halfway to sort of that ultimate goal by the end of our plan, we need to increase that number by 89%. And I think we have talked a little bit about those programs that would help move us towards this goal, but the CDSS rental assistance programs, like Bringing Families Home, and HDAP, right, which provide rental assistance to people who are eligible for disability benefits. DHCS's 6-month Medicaid funded transitional rent program, which was mentioned before. CDA's work coordinating with local homelessness services and long-term care systems to ensure older adults are, able to stay in their homes and receiving the proper housing resources. CDE implementing their homeless innovative programs grants to identify innovative practices to help improve housing stability for their youth. And DSH's work to address the needs of people in pretrial mental health diversion programs like we talked about, or like we heard about before. So that's goal number 4. I will move through these last 2 if there are no questions, and then it is your all's turn to discuss. So we will get to that in just a minute. Goal number 5 hasn't changed here, as you will see. I take responsibility for that. We have not yet had the chance to really sit down and work out what it's going to look like. Also, I just want to call out, this is a very new measurement that is a result of a data sharing that we are working on. So the baseline data and that we would use to create this sort of ultimate goal is still being worked on. So that is definitely something that we are working on and have moving forward, but I don't have anything new for you today about that. So we'll go to goal number 6. But actually, no, I do have examples about things that would move us towards that goal, right? So DHCS's and CDCR's work to address the needs of people exiting correctional settings through expedited enrollment in Medi-Cal, right, would move us towards that goal. DSS's work implementing CalWorks and ensuring it's tailored to the needs of the most vulnerable populations experiencing homelessness. And then CDPH's work to include data in the larger CalHHS data set to help us identify trends around mortality, communicable diseases, immunizations, right? So that we can better understand the services needs of people experiencing homelessness. So now we'll move on to our last goal, which is ensure people do not experience homelessness again. So here it would be that we want to ensure at least 96% of the people who move into permanent housing do not return to accessing homelessness services again. The ultimate goal being 100%, right? You move into permanent housing, you don't fall back into homelessness, you don't need to access those services again. We are currently at 91%, so the gap there is slightly less, but to get us halfway to 100 over the course of this plan, we would want to bump that percent up to 96%. And some of the work that's happening within that goal would be the workforce development board's work to help local workforce development boards enroll people accessing homelessness services into job training and education programs. Caltrans's work to analyze the extent to which people experiencing homelessness are being hired into their service assistance maintenance programs or positions. And then the Department of Aging and Department of Rehabilitation's work to help people age in place and not lose housing due to accessibility needs. So these are the goals that we have put before the council today, our bold goals. So open to taking both questions about these goals, about these numbers, right, so that we can talk them through, as well as having the discussion, which I will call upon Dr. Kuchel and Councilmember Lewis to help us walk through, just to, as we talked about, sort of take our individual department agency hats off, look as a collective and say, is this collection of the proposed activities that you are hearing about, right, from your from council members around you, realistically moving us towards our goals? What other strategic work do we need to focus on in order to reach these goals? And then what limitations do we collectively face in making progress towards our goals? Also, how could CalICH help overcome some of those limitations? So I will let Dr. Kuchel and Councilmember Lewis sort of run this. And if there's questions for me or questions about the goals, happy to jump in as well.
Thanks, Cody. Thank you to everybody who share your goals, share the things that are already happening within your respective departments and agencies. I'm going to say a few things and offer a few considerations as you all look and think about answering these questions. And so I took lots of notes, and I think that a couple of things I just want to flag. One, in terms of the draft goals, I'm grateful that we actually have we've quantified what we want to do, either increase, decrease, etc. But one thing I want to offer is that as the departments think about the bold goal, many of the things you all named are already contributing to the thousands of people that are being housed already, right? These numbers imply that we want to increase that. And so I did not hear a lot about how that would be accomplished. And as an organization who facilitates many of the programs that have been named, Homestay, bringing families up, literally, like I can rattle off 8 different ones that you all said that are directly administer at the local level. I did not hear a lot about what is the process to increase, because the things that you all name will continue the great work that's being done, the great impact that we have, the number of families and households that are being housed, rehoused, maintained in housing, but I did not hear anything related to how we get to these goals. And maybe it's because you said it after they say what they said, but I just want to flag for you all, that's silent in this space right now. And in terms of the challenges, obviously we're in a budgetary, we have some constraints budgetarily, but I just want to be honest that I didn't hear anything that takes us beyond what the current impactful work looks like now. The other thing, as Dr. Johnson said, I was really excited to hear about all of the goals connected to the integration and trying to make sure that we minimize barriers for people that are actually engaging with multiple systems. And so one of the things I want to say, some of you had very thoughtful strategies, some of you was very high level, and so just want to encourage everybody to really think about the action steps associated with the goals. But one of the things I think that's going to be critical is that we really create a framework for what integration means and what it looks like. We understand the primary systems across the state that folks are engaging with, right? And so I don't think that that exists. And some of you have done great work across your agencies, but it's more so been ad hoc. And I think that a framework, part of the action steps related to this action plan, has to be a framework at the state level. And beyond that though, because most of this is being administered at the local level, creating also a framework for your local jurisdictions that you're funding, building in policies that require or support then being able to do this integration and coordination at the local level. Like those are the kinds of things that don't necessarily exist consistently across all state agencies. And I think that we're gonna have to really think about what does it mean at the state level in terms of how do we understand all the different intersection points and help our local jurisdictions understand and require them to do that. But also, are we reassessing the policies and the program designs that your state departments are requiring that may preclude some of that, right? Or may create some of the barriers of integration, not only at the local jurisdiction level, but obviously people not having to bounce and have a lot of duplication or redundancy as they're trying to access the different systems. And so I think there's a lot of work, there's a lot more tangible, actionable steps that we could put in at the state level, and also some guidance for the departments to think about how it actually manifests on the ground at the local level. But really excited about all the things you all said. I just think we got to dig a little bit deeper. And I'm really concerned about how we actually get to the increasing and decreasing. So I think that please consider that as you think about these questions that have been posed.
Great, thank you. Veronica, I'll just add one or two things I just want to reflect on, that having these really bold goals with numbers. Am I good, Cody? Oh, there it's on. I think it's on now. Try this one. I think just want to reflect on having the bold goals with the numbers. I just want to name that it can be uncomfortable and scary, because I think we've all had the experience of like another 10-year plan saying we're going to reduce things by half. And the tension between that, when that doesn't happen, are we failing? But the flip side is, if you have a bold goal, you hold yourself accountable for something. And even if you don't get all the way there, you're probably going to get further than if we didn't actually go bold. And so I heard, like, I loved Councilmember Velasquez, like putting numbers down and also saying, and we will go to the Attorney General's office and we win when we do it. So as we're all thinking about it, I heard some new revenue streams. You know, we are in a budget crisis, but we had some excitement around the revenue streams from Prop 1, new revenue potentially from Medicaid and the 1115 waiver and things. I guess I want to push us in this discussion to actually be bold, but also think about what is getting in your way of being bold and not being afraid to be bold. Because I just want to say, even if we don't reach it, if we did better than we would have done without hitting that goal, that it's worth it to put that number down, even if we have to take a little bit of political flack at the end of the day for not reaching the bold goal. So I just want to name that tension. So maybe with that, Veronica, should we just start going through some of the questions? Or
yeah, and I answer 1 and 2 from my own perspective, but we would love to hear from you all. Do the things that you heard from one another today, do you feel like it's gonna help us reach the goals now that we've gone through not just the general goals, but also the actual numbers and directional goals we want to accomplish? And if not, then what other strategic work needs to be done to actually help us realize the goals?
I had a question about the connection to health and human services. Can you go back to that slide? Thank you. So I was wondering why CalFresh isn't listed on there. Is that something that we can add? And the reason is because once people are eligible for CalFresh, they become eligible for employment and training, which makes them eligible to go get training at the workforce development boards, which makes them eligible for supportive services, which makes them eligible for housing. So I was wondering, I had noticed that that wasn't on there. And also with the community colleges, they work together in the CalFresh ENT program.
This is Kim Johnson, Social Services. Yes, completely fantastic point, and something that we absolutely want to get connected to. As it relates to the action plan itself and what Cody referenced, he referenced CalWorks and Medi-Cal were the 2 programs listed on that slide. and he referenced data sharing. So we have existing data sharing capacity and capability to do some additional work with those two programs. CalFresh, there are some additional federal policies that we'll need to work through to get to that same point that we can do in those two programs too. So completely agree with you on the connection to CalFresh and how important it is in our integration of housing, health, and social services. And as it relates to our specific capacity at this very moment to demonstrate change over time, that's the challenge that we're facing right now with that policy. But I think to Director Lewis's comment, we have to also make sure we're addressing where policies are a barrier for either our own ability to look at the integration opportunities and gaps, but also in terms of what it means for actual providers at the local level in being able to do the same.
And I would like to piggyback off that. And what I'm hearing from Director Johnson is really also the commitment to really further our kind of MOU and kind of partnership on, especially around CalFresh. And our team actually, I think, are working with your team right now on the MOU. So I double plug there to really move that so we can categorically kind of looking at access for our students for CalFresh and Medi-Cal. And actually, thank you, Director Bass there on the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative that we're partnering on. Also, again, is looking at how to connect our students to really all the social safety net programs, regardless of where they are, really thinking about streamlining process there. So I think to respond, I think earlier to some of the comments here, I think some of the tension is when you think about those goal setting, right? We take off our respective agency hat, looking at collective impact. I think that makes a lot of sense. You trickle down all these goals, looking at what California needs and then move it down. But then I think, when we are drafting action plans, now there's this additional accountability piece there, right? And then also there's the budget constraints. So we are then looking at activities that they are very much aligned with our individual agency goals, right? And that's how we design it. So there's definitely a disconnect because again, like how we're moving these two pieces are different, right? So then we're at this tension point of kind of top down and bottom up. And then so I think to answer the first question of whether or not these activities are going to accomplish the goals, I don't know, right? Because right now all these activities are generated in a way in a silo, right, from different agencies. I don't know how these things are connected, how they're supplementing one another. Collectively, there isn't, or maybe I'm a visual learner. I want to see gaps and I can't see it. So it all sounds great, but I don't know, right? So that's really the answer there. And I think about, in terms of community college and our space there, I want to say our biggest power is the population that we serve. We serve 2 million every year, right? But then if you're thinking about the housing program, it's very, very small, right? So when we think about, $29 million for 2 million, for 2 million students. So we certainly are not going to be driving a lot of the major efforts, but we are very eager to understand where we can help, right? In kind, funding, right? How, and we don't know how. So I think the integration, speaking to the integration, I think it's really important to see how these activities can work together, and then also having some organic conversation that, I haven't thought about, but now that you're mentioning all these things and here's the gap, then that's where I feel like then I have the entry point to jump in and support.
A lot of what you just said really resonates with me, particularly this idea that do our collective activities result in the impact that we want? I mean, I think that's part of what we're trying to do here with the action plan, is to both identify who we're talking about. So many of the folks that we're talking about touch multiple systems, and we count them differently, we work with them differently, and in the aggregate, we're still not getting to the number of folks experiencing homelessness in California getting housed. So I think that this is really, not only is it a tension point, but it's for somebody who's been thinking about this for 2 decades. I'm like, how do we do it? And so I'm just marinating on that. Another thing I'm thinking about
Councilmember Lewis, you said in terms of both growing the pie, like a lot of what we do right now is just in service of those who we're serving. We have so many more that we need to be thinking about. And it doesn't necessarily mean more resources. It may mean leveraging all the resources across this council differently. So I'm really thinking about that. Like, to me, that is what collective action is targeting our investment strategies, programs more efficiently so that we know if if Tamika is touching Susan's system, is touching Tony's, like that kind of understanding of who is receiving what and whether or not we are ensuring access to our programs. The only other piece I wanted to raise for the council and members of the public is about our regionalism. There's something about we are doing our workforce work regional, in our regional pieces. We have our continuums of care. I wonder if there's ways to like break down some of these goals by region so that communities can actually begin to see our impact on the ground in their city, in their neighborhood, by county, by region. So there's something about not just looking at California writ large, but can we centralize some of our collective efforts by region is another thought I'm having.
Thank you, Secretary. That was part of my thinking too, is our action item is how we can better connect our AAAs with our COCs. And in talking to Cody, we realized we don't know a lot about the COCs. We're putting a lot of stock in them, and they might have 4 people working there, and we're all knocking on their doors to provide technical assistance and to build relationships while they're trying to do their work. And if you just map, this is just 2 slivers, 33 AAAs, 44 COCs, how do you crosswalk those? And then you've got the health plans, 58 counties, and everybody has a different map. So I like that regional approach that could bring people together, because the independent living centers that Director Xavier oversees have a whole different map too. And I would like to know more about the COCs and their capacity and their, what is helpful to them. That's a mystery a bit to us.
Thank you. On that note, COCs are one partner. CalICH sort of thinks, when we think of a local jurisdiction, we think of a city, a county, and a COC. And we think of, I don't remember who said it earlier. I think it was actually Dr. Aragon who said, we're thinking of this in terms of what we can control and what we impact. And when we think of those 3 entities in that same way, COCs are mostly federally funded and have projects that have been thought of and are receiving new funding that have been years in the making. And so similarly to our conversations with emergency services, want to set expectations reasonably for which each of these partners at the local level who are responsible for implementation, what boundaries they have and who is the appropriate person or entity to connect with.
Yeah, so a couple of things as I listen to you all, just again, I've said this multiple times. I was really excited to join this group because of the I in our name, right? The integration part and understanding what the lack of it results in, right, at the organizational level and obviously for the people that need help is really why I'm excited. So just listening to you, I think that, again, I'm gonna go a little bit further than what I said earlier in terms of creating a framework for what we mean by integration. And I love the collective impact model. That's the term we use, but I really think that's like that's the theme, like that's the model. Not to add one more thing to the action plan, but that's our model, right? Collective action, collective impact is ultimately what we're trying to achieve. But I think that going a little further, like the part of the work that probably needs to be done in the next 3 years is like understanding the intersection points across departments and systems, understanding the systems and programs that are complementary to one another, contradictory to one another, and also identifying the gaps, right? I think if we do those things, then we can begin to start to support thoughtful, strategic ways of really understanding where the connection points need to be made, where the alignment needs to be supported, et cetera. And then the other thing I want to say, and then I want to ask a question that's related to this. And so, for example, as I was listening to HCD's numbers and Cal FHA asks, well, do you understand what that's supposed to be? To me, I'm thinking, what, are there some things that Cal FHA can do in terms of regional approaches and prioritization to support that? And so I'm wondering, in any of the things that you all heard today, like, do you even see how you can work on aligning the goals that you have with other departments? Because when I heard her ask that question, I thought to myself, well, there's certainly things that they can do to support some of those regions. So in the talks, did you hear anything, any of your goals that directly connect to another department's goals? And if so, how does that, again, this whole discussion is trying to figure out how we can thoughtfully reach our goals, right? So that's why I'm posing that question.
It was our July meeting, and certainly in June, it was sort of like a meet and greet, right? Like, so you join a table, learn more about what your fellow council members do and what they support, and perhaps where you could be thought partners in that space. On the back end of things, Cal ICH staff have been digesting all of those conversations and identifying and mapping within the framework of the new action plan where those opportunities exist. So certainly folks should be inspired to have those conversations independent of Cal ICH staff, but it is something that we're coming to the table with to our respective council members and say, Director DeMorris, we've heard from Director Johnson at CDSS that A, B, and C is happening in the policy realm. These are things that have an impact here. Is this an opportunity to engage with your AAAs? So we're proactively making those suggestions for connections. So just wanted to the tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in the next 6-ish months to accomplish all of that, but that is something that the staff have been diligently working on.
So I just wanted to address some of the questions you're asking, Councilmember Lewis, and then just add on to some of the commentary. I think initially when you're asking us to be bold, as we should be, and saying really dive deep into these goals, what I hear around the table is a little bit of how important the integration of each of our services and departments and actions really are. And that a lot of what folks have uplifted and what they want to work on is better integration, because we do really kind of fall into that daily activity of work that's really focused on our own programs or our own target populations. And it is difficult to have some of those integrative conversations. I've seen them happen in our department with DHCS, for example. There was an action served recently that really showed how we can coordinate better on the ground and make sure that people who are impacted by our programs, for better or worse, are not falling into homelessness. That said, I think it would be important for us to look at our tools and align equity frameworks and actually call out integration and coordination more broadly, or more, somewhere in one of these. I know we have goals, like larger statewide goals that we want to achieve here. And that's kind of going to come down to the objectives, the work plans, all the strategies we use to implement those. But as far as just another underpinning, it really should be integration across our agencies and departments. And then it should also be integration at the local level, which, again, I think a lot of us have said this before, we are still missing local representation on Cal ICH in a lot of ways. And I think about, we have COCs, we have state jurisdictions, or I'm sorry, we have cities, we have counties, we have COCs, but those aren't really layered by region in a way that allows for us to probably tackle important issues. I think about how in a disaster, how the state responds to a wildfire and has a local assistance center, and you go from emergency like response to recovery. We don't have anything like that across our local communities that could be a recovery type response that layers every single entity in a region to be able to go in and address something like this. It's pretty ad hoc. And so until we can figure out how our agencies actually align with that, and we are in the local jurisdictions and regions to address a very specific issue at a time or a broader plan, I don't know that we're going to get as far as you would like us to go, because it comes down to, we do have parameters and limitations in that respect. So more integration is really the key.
Okay. Dr. Kusha, okay, great.
So first, I love the integration conversation. I mean, it's a lot about connecting dots and, all the things we talk about a lot here. I don't want to underestimate the federal barrier in some of that. I mean, the rules around how Medicaid touches a social service program, whatever it is, or what comes into Susan's agency or Joe's agency. I mean, sometimes it's hard to put them together because the forms, which we don't make up and we have to implement, look a certain way. So as we all think about kind of the different levels of California involvement, whether it's local, county, state, the advocacy on, hey, this doesn't actually make sense in Veronica Lewis's shop, right? The fact that her staff, because we say what the feds want us to say in terms of how it all rolls out, you have to do the same thing 3 different times, or the same person needs to come in and interact different ways or at the health plan level. So I just want to call that out because this is wonderful, like really important stuff about how we integrate, but it sort of gets thwarted almost reliably so because of some of those federal things. And this is not passing the buck. Like, we have a ton of work to do here, but it only really manifests in a regional way or block by block in whatever city or town you want to talk about in California because of that federal flexibility or integration as well. So just as we think about how we get to action, that's going to sneak its way in as a real reason to kind of work through.
I just wanted to highlight that supporting the greater work of the council and certainly CalICH staff, where we have multiple representatives from local governments, cities, counties, COCs, tribal governments, are on our advisory committee, our lived experience advisory board, as well as our various working groups. And so those are all available if there's a specific initiative or ask that the council has that they would like local perspective. We're certainly always happy to agendize that with those respective bodies as well.
I just a couple comments. I think I'm sorry, did I jump the? Sorry about that. I would also really I really like kind of the regional approach and goal setting. I think, when I look at our system, I think our some of our our partners across the state also, it's a very kind of a the localized governance structure. So I think having some kind of regional goals will actually very much support I think the facilitation of activities locally, because again, it's reflecting kind of the community realities there. But then I think another piece is I think integration is one piece. And I know, thank you for, Secretary Galley's kind of insight there around just like there's some structural barriers currently. It's just not a short-term, there's just no short-term solution. But I think even awareness is really important, because I think sometimes the narrative is, well, we just don't know. Therefore, we think of ourselves as like the singular solution. And if we can't provide it, then it's a little bit of a shruggy, like, well, that's difficult. It's unfortunate. And it ends there. But if we're knowledgeable enough to say, like, yes, it's gonna be complicated, but you can go here to get this form and go here for a different form, and we can't do that, but here's what we can do. I think having that common knowledge and knowing where the friction points are will be a big win already for the populations we're serving. Because right now it's more of a black box.
There are clearly things that maybe can't be overcome at all. There are things that are barriers, and there are things that we sort of think of as barriers, but actually they can be overcome. And it might be worth trying to map that out and making sure we're not fearing integration because we fear there may be something when actually it is overcomable, and also just naming what, without changes in federal policy, really aren't overcomable. Like, I think those things are distinct things. And I also just want to name the distinction between sort of efficiencies and things and just scale. And like, are we able to muster the resources to scale at the size? Because efficiency can only get you, like, I feel like in the homeless sector, it often gets blamed for being inefficient when actually the problem is one of scale, and just to like keep those as perhaps separate concepts and also just be able to name like what can we fix with better efficiency and what do we actually just need to really look at scale.
I think it was in gosh, must have been June's council meeting. I think we've seen everyone for the last several months consecutively. So my apologies for not remembering the date correctly, but we had conversations about what the action plan is and what the action plan currently isn't, but could be. And what it historically has not been is a document to suggest to number one, to name, to your point, Dr. Kushel, like what the challenges are, why we're not seeing additional investments in a particular area, but as a suggestive document to our folks in the legislature and elsewhere, right? What is needed in order to move California forward? So.
The only other thing I want to add to this is that I've seen some amazing examples of a huge investment of time where people have overcome what seemingly were unsurmountable challenges with respect to nuances they couldn't change, right? Related to policies that were federally required, but figuring out still how to work it all out on the back end so that on the front end, the person didn't have to jump through all those hoops and so there's many examples of that. And I think that you know, we're in a time of constraint budgetarily, but I think that if there's investment in having people dig into it deeply and figure it out, not only can we address and remove the barriers of the things that we do and address and work through the complexities, I'll say it that way, right? That people just haven't had the investment of time to be able to do. But we also then can, obviously there's folks that are advocating at the state level for federal policies to change. But the other thing is the state of California is a part of the USICH's all-in campaign initiative, whatever it's called. And it's been a few months since they presented here. And the other benefit of really understanding fully what all those barriers are that we can figure out on our own versus the ones that we can't control because they're federal policies is to collectively be able to paint the picture of all the different, but we haven't been able to do that, right? We can talk about some of the barriers related to Medicaid. There's a lot. We can talk about some of the barriers related to Social Security. We can talk, but to be able to speak to USICH, who has us all in campaign, about how all these different policies interact and intersect and approach it from that will be another bonus and benefit to working through this, right? But it's a lot of work and it's a lot of time, but I think that it will be worth it and beneficial ultimately to help us reach our goals, but also it strengthens our ability to advocate.
I just want to make sure to punctuate a point building off what you just said. The federal issues, they're challenges, but they're not absolute barriers. And California, I often am reminded 1 in 8 Americans lives here. So DC listens to what this group will say. So they are very mutable, right? We can change some of these things. And I think the collective examples of how our integration only goes so far, but the notice of how some flexibilities at the federal level might help this go even further, I think is really important. So just the point of my initial statement was we actually, I appreciate that it feels like it's hard to change, and it is, but it can be done, and we've done it before on a lot of different things. COVID, wow, the number of flexibilities we got during COVID because it made sense. It was good for people. We were granted it. So I think we can keep up that theme because of the work we're all doing collectively.
I just wanted to lift up the last thing you just said, Secretary, about what's good for people. I mean, we're sitting around this table talking about our policies and programs. That's what we do. We administer those things. And we then talk about the people and their interaction with those systems. And having been a social worker and a practitioner, working with folks who would go to their Medicare or their CalWorks office and need to transfer their benefits to another county and have difficulty doing that, couldn't get the right person on the phone, and then couldn't get connected. There's something about both, not just sort of humanizing our systems, but how do we think about, to the second question, is there work that we can do in training our staff to have a more human-centered approach around how, in fact, we are at least working with our folks on the ground? When people come into your offices, are we saying, no, we can't do that automatically? A lot of times. I mean, that's at least my experience. Could we say something different? Could we say, actually, here is where you can go to get those forms. Here are the barriers, but I know Jane over there because Jane, let me call Jane and see if, so there's something about both relationships and how we reestablish what these systems are supposed to be producing on people's behalf that are not quantifiable. It's maybe soft, but there's something about the value of that, because when a person is at their most vulnerable and they are coming somewhere for help and they interact with someone who is not helpful, it's a problem. Even if they can't get their needs met, if they feel like that person was helpful, they're going to have a better experience, and they're going to want to continue on the journey to get the help that they need. So I just wanted to put that into the conversation, because I was thinking about, like, so many folks I've worked with over the years being frustrated with how disconnected our systems are. Yet, as we work on integration, we need to work from a human-centered perspective.
All right. Oh, can you hear me? It's quiet. I'm loud. It's okay. Well, thank you all for this discussion. I know it feels like there's always more to talk about here. But I think it's really helpful. And I think Councilmember Ruano Shaughnessy, I think something you said really stuck out to me, which is like, it's hard to know the answer to these questions, right? And I think hopefully the action plan can help provide that. So I think something that we're thinking about, right, is like, how can we create the action plan in such a way that it at least helps us to even start answering these questions, while also calling for these sort of bolder goals, right? And so we are going to take back all of your thoughts, and as Megan said, I think digest them, and try to come to you all with an action plan that not only is bold, but also provides the information and sort of the perspective that we all need in order to understand what we need to do to move towards those goals. So thank you all for your thoughts and for your sharing and for being under 2 minutes per person. That was extremely helpful. And now I want to talk about, very briefly, I will just do the introduction here. But I want to talk about resources that you have already invested in and have been investing in, whether or not you knew, which is our Racial Equity Working Group. And that is a group that has been going, oh gosh, I don't even know how long anymore. It feels like 10 years, feels like 2 months. But it includes members of staff from many of your departments or agencies. It includes community members, people with lived experience of homelessness, all who have come to, it includes a council member, Lewis, thank you. And all of these people have been coming together to help us think about how do we not just talk about equity in the work, but how do we move it forward, and how do we center our work around the equity needs in this system that we know, I think Dr. Galley said, are obvious and that are, predictable. So I want to introduce our brave leaders, Lori Pompilo Harris and Dr. Lamont Green, and they are going to lead us through the next section of the agenda.
Okay, deep breath. And I say that because you all just had a really robust conversation. And I'm a person, my name is Lori Pompilo Harris, as Cody said. I identify as Indigenous, I'm Native Hawaiian. And the way that our belief system is that we are all in this room, in this moment in your life, for a reason. The gods, goddesses, the stars have called us for this moment. We're not here by accident. And so we're going to take you through a journey together. Lamont, you want to say a few words and then.
This is kind of an emotional moment for me. My name is Lamont Green, and I am a military veteran. I'm also a person with lived experience of homelessness. And my homelessness started in California, actually in Fresno, then Sacramento, and then I ended up on the streets of San Francisco. I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a Gullah Geechee native. And like I said, I served in the military. I'm a bit older now, as you can tell from the gray hair. And so I was in the don't ask, don't tell military, right? So as a gay Black boy from the deep South Carolina South, it was very difficult. So after I got out the military, I had a lot of internalized demons, right? I was struggling with in a society where it's not okay to be Black and definitely not okay to be gay, right? And as a little boy, I never processed any of that. So I was out of the military, I had all this money saved up, but I didn't want to go back to South Carolina. I didn't know what I want to do yet. I was invited to a party, and that's where I took my first hit of crack cocaine, and I instantly become addicted because all my troubles, the depression, the anxiety, all went away. And it quickly spiraled out of control where I was living in my car, and then my car was impounded, all my money was gone. Started using meth and walking the streets, trying to beg, hustle for money. And I was one of those people that you would see that would be disheveled, you know, psychotic, begging for money. And it was a suicide attempt that landed me in the hospital at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that's when the shift started for me, and I began to get connected to services. And the VA sent me to a special program they had in the Puget Sound area, the Pacific Northwest, American Lake, where they do a lot of their pilot programs, a lot of their behavioral health research. And so they sent me up to American Lake, beautiful campus and beautiful program. They had fishing, art therapy, spirituality, you named it. It was an amazing program. And that was the beginning of my transformation. Vocational rehabilitation, on-demand treatment, you know, housing first, all of those things were integrated. And it made a difference for me, right? Because I am very lucky to be alive today, really, given the situation. So I'm very thankful to Department of VA and really the state of California and all the amazing work and listening to what you all are doing in your action plans, because I'm a living proof that this matters. And so many people, so many unnecessary deaths, and we could make a tremendous difference. I just want to thank you all for your passion and the work that you all are doing. Thank you.
Let's see here. Oh. We'll go.
There we go. So thank you to the Cal ICH co-chairs, Secretary Moss, Dr. Ghali, and council members, and the Cal ICH staff for sharing this time with us today. So Lamont and I have been on this journey with the REWG for over a year now. It has not been only an honor for us to have been supporting Cal ICH and the fierce individuals who make up the REWG, but it has given us both energy and inspiration. And as Lamont has shared his lived experience, I also have lived experience of homelessness, poverty, and displacement. And our journey with the REWG towards a commitment to systemic change holds a really deep personal and professional meaning, as Lamont just shared. So what we all know and what we should all acknowledge, and you have said it in some of your bold goals, right, is that racial inequities in the homelessness response system are not isolated acts of prejudice. They are deeply rooted in systemic structural racism that has been embedded in our country and our state's policies, institutions, and cultural norms for generations. It is a level of intentionality that happened previous to us that was racist acts of injustices that continue to perpetuate in the systems that we are all representing. So when we think about the consequences of those actions, they are still felt today, to this very moment, and creating this racial divide that we are now responsible in this room to address in this next action plan. This is not just about fairness, it's about justice, it's about survival, it's about the future of our communities to be able to live a fulfilled and thriving life. So we must act now to ensure that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities and tribal nations are not left behind yet again. So the drafting of the action plan is what we're offering here to you in this conversation. is not to only address homelessness broadly, but must infuse racial equity into every solution, every program, and every interaction. If we do not actively work to dismantle those structures that uphold those inequities, our efforts will fall short in the action plan. We have to be very clear with ourselves that racial equity is not just a moral imperative, it is the key to preventing and ending homelessness in California. If we are truly committed to a future where homelessness is eradicated, we must integrate racial equity frameworks into the action plan and then lead with that heart for justice and transformation. So the intentions that you see here that are setting out by including racial equity frameworks into the action plan include these intentions: addressing disparities. So when you think about racial and ethnic communities, particularly Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Native American groups, we are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. So having a racial equity framework ensures that interventions and resources are directed to address specific needs of those communities. Tailoring solutions. Homelessness affects different racial and ethnic communities uniquely, so we cannot use a one-size-fits-all framework to do that. We have to have a racial equity framework that is nimble and enables us to design interventions that are culturally responsive and tailored to those specific communities. We want to have the intention of ensuring inclusivity. A racial equity framework will prioritize those voices of those who are being impacted, those who are currently enduring homelessness, ensuring that they are central to the development of solutions aimed at preventing and ending homelessness. That will actually be a critical component to fostering those more effective and sustainable strategies when you have those who are directly impacted and utilizing the system to be a part of that conversation. Preventing unintended harm is an intention. Without a racial equity lens, policies can inadvertently bring harm when we think that we're actually helping. So there is a racial equity framework that ensures we are intentional in preventing that harm and bias in all policies, programs, funding, and practices. You all just talked about building trust, this human-centered approach to the work that you all are talking about through the action plans. Marginalized communities have historically been excluded or underserved by systems that perpetuate harm. And the way that we can demonstrate a genuine commitment to addressing that historical harm and ongoing racial injustices, we have to foster trust and increase community engagement, which is done through a racial equity framework. And then this continuous improvement, right? This on-time, real-time opportunity to continue to refine the work that we're talking, the goals that we have, our intentions, and then being able to prioritize a racial equity leads to those better overall outcomes that leads to long-term solutions. So these intentions that you see here that we're offering to you are an acknowledgement that the collective actions of this council will historically remain. We are all creatures of consequence, and we believe that infusing racial equity frameworks, there will be positive consequences that will remain in our future history. So let's talk about the racial equity frameworks. So these are what the racial equity work group has adopted and will be recommending to be infused with the action plan. The first is you all have identified those state tools. We directly looked at what racial equity framework or intervention best suits those state tools. So using data strategically, we are offering up that implementing targeted universalism, where we pursue universal goals through targeted interventions for marginalized communities. This is how you will be able to allow to raise all groups, right, to the same aspiration point, while recognizing that each group may require different paths to get there. You all are going to be able to get up and stretch your legs in a minute because we're going to do an interactive exercise so we can share how targeted universalism looks and feels like. Engaging partners and communities. We link that directly with leveraging equity-centered community design. This is a racial equity framework that ensures the active engagement of historically excluded communities in developing and implementing the action plan. This fosters that co-creation, that co-design of what it is that we're seeking to get out of local communities and those local providers, and also those with lived experience, ensuring that the reflection of those with lived experiences are a part of those conversations. The state tool around increasing housing supply and services. We would offer up that applying equity-based decision-making frameworks is a way to ensure that funding and policies prioritize first fairness and then justice, and therefore reduces disparities in housing and services for those marginalized groups. That fourth tool here, coordinating, streamlining state programs. You guys talked about a collective impact. Lamont and I refer it to as systems alignment, right? You're looking for systems to align, to integrate. And we believe that can be done through what we are offering to you, the Racial Equity Impact Model, Collective Impact 3.0. And that is to ensure that systems alignment and streamline interventions across departments, fostering collaboration for holistic and impactful change. We are saying a lot of good words, right? But we all know what we get stuck on is the actual implementation of this. And so that systems alignment, this collective impact model 3.0, I know we all know what collective impact is, but there's a 3.0 model that's really focused on racial inequities and justice that we'll be introducing to you all. And then the last one, advancing best practices and quality. We want to ensure that we can embed a continuous quality improvement, or as we say, continuous quality innovation, as a process to evaluate and refine policies and practices through an equity lens. So let's dive deeper into one specific framework that was developed by our homegrown University of California, Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute, John Powell's Targeted Universalism. And right before we do that, Dr. Green is gonna walk us through this racial equity framework. He did forget and neglect to tell you from his story today, he is a PhD and a renowned social worker. And it's just an honor to be here with him today. So his story is powerful, and it's the story of many others that we can be supporting generations from now. Those are the stories that we want to hear moving forward.
Thank you, Lori. That's quite generous. I just do what Lori tells me to do. Lori is such an awesome colleague. So we're going to do this interactive exercise, but before we do it, just want to make some acknowledgements. One, we're really focusing on race and racism. So we're not going to be ignoring, right, the intersectionality of ableism, sexism, heterosexism, adultism, and all those other isms that are very important. So we're not neglecting that, but we're really wanting to ground and focus on race and racism. The second thing is we're going to do some historical grounding and some context setting. And so this might seem very elementary to you all. It's not to insult, but we're on different places in our racial equity journey, and it's always good to have a little bit of reminders. So first, I would like to define race. And this definition of race is one that I borrowed from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. If you can ever check them out, they are amazing. They do the best undoing institutional racism training workshops in the world. And so they define race as such. Race is a false classification of humans created by European scientists for the purposes of maintaining and establishing power and privilege for white people, right? It's a false classification created by European scientists for the purposes of maintaining power and privilege for white people. And so when we think about racism, the formula or definition I like to use for racism is that racial prejudice plus power equals racism. All different racial groups can have racial prejudice, but not all racial groups in the United States of America have power. And so sometimes you'll hear low-income white folks say, you know, I had to pull myself up by the bootstraps. I don't have power. But it's in the invisible things like the policy, like think about the war on drugs that impacted the Black community with the crack cocaine epidemic. What was the response? A criminal legal system response, right? Lock them up, 3 strikes, you're out. And with the early rising of the opioid crisis, we saw how rural white families were impacted. And what was our response? A health and human services response, an opioid crisis. So race wasn't called out in any of that, but we can see how the invisible privilege happens when the racial power group is white, right? And we like that white folks are getting that type of policies, right? That benefits, but that should be for all people, irregardless of their race, right? And so that's how we define racism. Racial prejudice plus power equals racism. And so when we talk about white supremacy, we're not talking about European culture, right? We're talking about this ideology, this false construct that was developed hundreds of years ago that lives in our very DNA, that lives in our very subconscious, right? That's the thing that we're trying to unpack. That's the work that you all are doing. So when we look at homelessness and we say, why are there so many Black, brown, and indigenous people experiencing homelessness? It's not because those cultures and groups have some pathology. It's this legacy of structural racism that we are all here now trying to undo. So when we think about the levels of racism, we start with that ideological piece, right? Of racism, of white supremacy. And it's infused in everything, right? Our school, our newspapers, everything that you could possibly imagine. Even the scientists are now saying it's even passed on epigenetically in our DNA, right? And it mainly lives in our subconscious. So we don't even know what we know, right? And so we internalize that, and that's the internalized racism. And then we interact with people, and that we notice the interpersonal racism, right? But then people make up the institutions. And whether we're talking about the institution of the criminal legal system, the health institution, the government, mortgage, financing, banking, all those institutions tend to be run by predominantly one demographic, right? So we see institutional racism playing out. And we know from the data that 75% of white Americans do not have people of color in their close social networks. When it comes to jobs, right? It's based on the network, not what you know, but who you know, right? So when organizations, the higher up you go, you see less and less diversity. So that's when we see the institutional racism. So when we say systemic or structural racism, it's now the ways that the criminal legal system, the educational system, the healthcare system, the child welfare system, all are acting as a foot of oppression on Black, brown, and indigenous families through policies. And that's what we call systemic structural racism. All right. So before we get to targeted universalism, we want to do this exercise. And as I mentioned earlier, that race is this false construct that was created by some European scientists. Well, in this racial hierarchy that was created, and they had to develop this racial hierarchy because in the 17th century, in the age of discovery, there was a lot of slavery, colonialism and all those things. And so there was growing sentiment in Europe that slavery, genocide, these type of things are wrong. It was mainly a Christian ethos in Europe. So there needed to be some type of justification. And so in the 18th century, science came along, the Age of Enlightenment, right? So now we can know our world and we can establish facts, and we don't have to be ruled off of religion or mythology or astrology and those types of things. And so that's where we had scientific racism, where the scientists analyzed every part of the human body and created this racial hierarchy. And at the top of that racial hierarchy was Caucasoid, or what we would now call Caucasian or white. So can I get a volunteer, a white person that would like to volunteer to come to the front? Yes, thank you. Thank you for volunteering. And so, yeah, you're just gonna come and stand up front here. I promise I won't bite. Okay. And so Caucasoid was considered the height of human achievement and the fully developed man, the supreme man, right? The white supremacy. Next in this hierarchy was a term they called at that time mongoloid. And this is often a derogatory term that is used towards people with developmental delays. You may have heard that term mongoloid, right? So it's very interesting because Asians were considered to be human, but of inferior development, but human nonetheless. Can I get an Asian person to come to the front, please? Thank you. And next in our racial hierarchy, yes, we have to have white first, and then you're second, right? Okay, and so next, they would have what's called Australoid. And these were considered to be what we would call the indigenous peoples today. And so if I can get someone that is indigenous or Native American to come forward, please.
My family's Taino, Puerto Rican. Does that count?
We'll have you stand in the gap. Thank you. That does count. All right. And then at the very bottom of this hierarchy, we would have the Negroid. And the Negroid was not considered to be human, but to be more closely in relation to primates, such as gorillas and monkeys. And so we can get a Black or African-American person to come up, please.
All women.
Now, this was in this time frame, so if you notice, we have some groups that are missing. And so we're going to fold this out a little bit more. And we also want to recognize our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander folks who are also highly overrepresented in homelessness. So I can get someone that's Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander to come forward. Okay, we'll have you stand here in between these two ladies, right? And then there's a tremendous amount of confusion with things changing, right? Like Hispanic, Chicano, Latina used to be a race. It's an ethnicity now, so any racial group can be of that ethnicity. And then also for what we call Middle Eastern folks, there's a movement to change that to Southwest Asian, North Africans. And so if we have someone that is Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, North African, or Latina, Hispanic, Chicano that would like to come forward. Yes, thank you. And we're gonna have you stand, because you're representing Indigenous, right? Yep. So we're gonna have you stand right here. Thank you. Okay. So this is more what the modern day racial hierarchy looks like, right? Okay. Now, before we get into looking at some other things, and targeted universalism really helps us in a really key way. And as Dr. John Powell with the Other Belonging Institute helps us to understand in this framework, is that different groups sit differently in relation to power and resources in the United States of America, right? The white experience, the Asian experience, the Latina experience, the Indigenous African-American experience, right? Each of these racial groups sit differently in relation to resources and power. So whenever you have a one-size-fits-all policy, it can cause unintended harm and impact. So let's do a quick case study. How many of you have heard about the VI SPDAT? Okay, so that's the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool, right? So many of our COCs, Continuum of Cares, have been using this tool for quite some time in order to prioritize people for housing, right? Not enough affordable housing. So with the limited housing resources that we have to prioritize our most vulnerable. And what they discovered about the XPDAT after several research studies is that it actually over-prioritized white folks and it doesn't assess the vulnerability of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. And so we ask ourselves, why is this? Well, on this end of the spectrum, disability, mental health, physical health issues tend to be the genesis of homelessness, right? On this end of the spectrum, it tends to be more social disadvantage. Now, it's not that this end of the spectrum is not dealing with disabilities, but it's not a diagnosed disability because of the historical mistrust with medical health systems, right? But the VI SPDAT is really looking at those diagnosed documented disabilities. But because of the historical mistrust, the medical system bias, this end of the spectrum are going to use more emergency care or acute care services. So when they go to get an assessment, they're going to respond to the questions very differently, right? So for decades, we've had communities prioritizing at a high rate white folks for permanent supportive housing and not able to assess the vulnerability of this group. And so what targeted universalism teaches us, it's not about affirmative action. We want to assess the vulnerability of white folks and Asian folks and Latina folks and Indigenous folks and Black folks. We want to assess, right? But the VI SPDAT hasn't been doing that. And it's created a lot of harm and some early deaths, right? Now, this is a low-hanging fruit because many of your communities are moving away from the VI SPDAT and have actually created more equitable assessments. Right here in Sacramento, they've done awesome work and working with people with lived experience and creating a new assessment, and several other communities in California. But a lot of communities are still using the VI-SPID app because that's the only tool they have, and they don't have the capacity, right? So that's a major low-hanging to marking your action plan stuff. I just had to sneak that in there. Okay, so that's about the VI-SPID app. Now, I'm gonna ask you all to point, and for those of you that are visually impaired, we're gonna be pointing like towards the screen. So looking at the screen, this is the left and this is the right. And on the left side is where we have the white end of the spectrum. And then on the right side is where we have the indigenous and Black end of the spectrum. And so I'm gonna ask a question, and I want you to point towards which part of the spectrum of the racial group do we see this manifestation? So which racial groups experience the highest levels of disproportionality in homelessness? Point to the side. Right, to the right side. Yeah. How about when we look at the carceral legal system? Yes. How about the groups that were most impacted in the mortgage crisis of 2008? Yes. How about negative child welfare outcomes? I learned in California, y'all heard about the scoop era? Up until the 80s in California, child welfare workers would come in and scoop up Native children's. This happened up until 1990s in some parts of Canada. It's called the scoop era, right? So there's people that are living with this multi-generational impact. How about what group experiences the most medical bias and lower outcomes when we look at the social determinants of health? Yeah. And we learned a lot from COVID. How about what COVID revealed and the impacts? Which side were impacted there? Yeah. Now, which racial groups are the ones that really develop the research that informs the evidence? And we look at the researchers, right? Point to which side of the spectrum. Yes. How about who are the decision makers, right? Deciding policy, resources, and funding, mainly. Yeah. Which group tends to be underrepresented in homelessness? Yeah. And when we look at the consultant ecosystem, right? Because we need consultants to help do all the work. So I'm not trying to bash anyone. But when we look at our consultants that we're using, right? What side of the spectrum do they tend to reside mostly? Yeah. And do they tend to have lived experience a lot of times? Are we hiring context experts? You know, that are very important as well, right? And so, as you can see, there's a bit of a discrepancy there, right? And so the solution, well, first let's give our wonderful volunteers a round of applause. Thank you all. And so one example of the solution we're talking about is targeted universalism. And so there's many different frameworks that we talked about. And targeted universalism is the one that helps us to utilize data strategically. My voice is dry. Is there one of you that would like to read that first green box? Can I get a volunteer? I have the mic here too. Volunteer. Thank you, Tomas.
Okay, in a targeted universalism framework, only the goals are universal, but the implementation processes are targeted. It is different from targeted policies in that targeted policies start with targeted goals. Targeted universalism seeks to raise all groups to a common aspiration point, even though it may take different paths or efforts to achieve that goal.
Excellent. Thank you, Tomas. And so this is how this would work. And we're just going to do a quick run through because I'm running out of time. There's never enough time. But we would establish a universal goal, right? And with the governor's executive order, we're going to be focusing on ending unsheltered homelessness with a quickness, right? Otherwise, we'll have we have to learn from the war on drugs. We don't want to have a war on homelessness, right? And we know that if we don't have a clear strategy, sometimes these policies and mandates will cause a lot of harm. And what ends up happening is it feeds into the criminal legal system and other systems, right? So this moment, provides a great opportunity for a sense of urgency to end unsheltered homelessness. And we know we have to do the work of building affordable housing. But when we look at the inflow of homelessness right across the nation, homelessness has increased 20%. People are having a hard time. And so we're going to have to be innovative. We're going to have to look at some of those empty schools and empty churches and turn them into single room occupancy and communities that are designed by people most impacted so they'll want to go to those places. We don't want to build shelters that people don't want to go to, where they can't bring their partners, their pets and possessions, and they have privacy and dignity and humanity, right? And so here we establish a universal goal and unsheltered homelessness for all, right? And then we assess our performance to the relative to the goal. And we may say, oh, we're about 60% there. And the next step, we have to look at differences by population. Very critical. How are our white folks doing? How are our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders doing? Our American natives doing? All these different groups we have to look at individually, and we have to understand what are the drivers for each of those groups. And when we do this, we need to work with the groups, y'all. We need to share decision-making power. Someone said professionalism has never solved homelessness, right? Professionalism is good, but hyper-professionalism is bad. And when you have that lived expertise, people with lived experience, those most impacted, alongside system partners with shared decision-making, that's the human-centered design that Secretary Moss is talking about. That's when you get powerful, effective solutions. Communities know what they need. And so when we understand this, working with communities, we then co-design strategies to develop that. And we're going to have to be innovative, quick, and nimble. But we have a lot of resources. The scarcity piece is a myth, right? There are a lot of resources there that we could use differently. And that's why innovation matters. So this is Charter University, quick and dirty snapshot there. So let's move to this next piece that's really important and that the Racial Equity Working Group has been working on. They've been working on developing a racial equity implementation hub. So we shared all of these different equity frameworks. And you all have been talking about how systems alignment is so key. How can we begin to integrate our funding and integrate our service delivery? Because right now it's a nightmare. You got to have a system advocate and a clinical social worker to help you navigate all of this, right? So when we're serving a whole person, the more we can integrate our service delivery and integrate our funding, that's a huge win-win, right? And so how can we get workforce development to see that, you know, there are quite a few people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness that can benefit from your services? Because sometimes some systems see those folks as not being job ready or work ready, right? But some communities have overcome that barrier by having some really innovative programs designed for people who are wanting to work while they are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, right? And so here, what we talk about often, and I think someone said this, right? We've had the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. It's very good to have very clear plans, right? But the implementation is where it falls apart. And so the Racial Equity Work Group has identified this, and they are in the process of designing an implementation hub to help state departments and those that you fund in implementing these strategies and providing that coaching and that support, because that's often a major area people need the capacity and support. All right, so Lori, am I on time? Am I good? Okay, thank you. Thank you all for listening. We're gonna have Q&A later too.
So we're going to transition to the co-chairs of the Racial Equity Work Group. But before we do that, we did want to share this moment that you are about to witness, the two co-chairs, was actually birthed out of many months of intentionality of a pre-implementation team of community members with lived experience, senior staffers from HCD, DSS, California Housing Authority, Cal ICH, and in particular, Council Member Veronica Lewis, who in particular, and I've seen it witnessed again today, she has pushed Cal ICH and its state departments to commit at a very high level of having senior staffers who are going to commit to this transformative actions at the Racial Equity Work Group, and the departments that they're going to represent. So if you have not heard from your appointee who's sitting on the racial equity work group how things are going, you should be getting briefings on a monthly basis. We meet on a monthly basis. We meet for 90 minutes. We are doing the darn thing. Find out what the darn thing is and how it can help influence what you're doing at your departments. So thank you, Councilmember Lewis, for setting that tone for bold, audacious, and setting the pace for what we expect from the council and its departments. Director Velasquez, you and the state of California are blessed and extremely lucky to have Janice Waddell, and now also as Janice as one of the co-chairs. Prior to her working with the Racial Equity Work Group, I was deployed by HUD to work alongside Janice and HCD during COVID, and Janice was willing to take on HUD. You guys just talked about challenging the feds, setting the mark. She challenged them, and she always was daring and audacious and was never take no as an answer from HUD. She just kept asking, and then they finally said yes. So thank you, Janice, for that same daring spirit. And then this group is also extremely blessed to have another, the theme of the day is bold, apparently, a bold and courageous community member, Earl Sims. Earl's perspective and leadership is going to be invaluable. His voice, his experience, his words should hold the heaviest of the weights on our ears, hearts, and spirits that we hear today. These are the voices of other lived experience community members who have endured homelessness that are also part of our racial equity work group that we are representing today. I think you'll find that these co-chairs and the REWG members will give you the courage and security in knowing that they will be your support mechanism as you make these consequential decisions that will last generations to create racial injustice. Hand it over to you all.
All right, thanks very much. Really happy to be here today with you all and tell you a little bit about what we've been working on. As Lori said, my name is Janice Waddell and I'm with HCD. And I'm gonna turn it over to Earl now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Earl Sims. Pronouns are he, him, and his. The other half of the co-chair of the Racial Equity Work Group. And I'm executive director for a very small nonprofit that provides services for those that are formerly incarcerated. I've done coaching with the gun violence prevention program in Oakland. And I am a person who has experienced the criminal justice system. I served 22 years. Housing instability led to some of my actions, but I am by no means not being accountable for the things that I did and the harm that I caused, the tremendous harm that I caused in the community. So this work that I do is dedicated to the life that I took away from society. So after serving a life sentence, I kind of hit the ground running. And I think this work and what we're doing today, okay. So I think it's essential, just listening to the words that you were speaking today, and you're talking about intersectionality or integration. Sorry, integration, I'm nervous. Collaboration, integration, and the right to be bold. That's really inspiring for me because it's going to require innovation to kind of unwrap what has been done over a long period of time. And I think we just got a perfect example of what that looks like, how policies may have a good intention from 10,000 feet above the air, but on the ground it's felt totally different. So merging those two voices in mind and to be thought partners together, I think is super essential, and it's an honor to be here representing our group. So we're one of 5, that's fine. We're one of 5 working groups, and we are here as thought partners to be to work with you, alongside of you, to support the overall agenda, which is addressing homelessness. That's fine. So here's our motley crew. I got a joke because I'm nervous. That I'm walking around. I just really paid attention to that. But so the racial equity work group was created from the action plan itself. Hearing the needs and what you've called as a council, and to highlight the focus that you wanted to focus on. We really are walking alongside with you to tackle the racial disparities in homelessness, especially in communities that have been left out, like Black, Brown, Pacific Islanders, Indigenous communities, as well as tribal nations. So I think it is, thank you. So what we've done, we came up with a mission statement. I'm a lot better in a working group than I am speaking, so please have faith with me. I appreciate y'all. So we wanted to be intentional when we created our mission statement. So the racial equity work statement is to develop inclusive, culturally responsive, and equity-driven solutions to prevent and end homelessness in California using a racial equity and decolonize, right? Use a decolonizing framework. The racial equity work group works to transform state policies, as well as programs and funding strategies to address the root causes and the persistent drivers of racial and social inequities for Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and tribal nations. I know I just said that. It's like I'm repeating myself, but I think it's something that needs to be repeated. We really launched and doing similar exercises as what you did. I didn't realize that I had some of the residue of what I've experienced in this society, in this community. And I think it's so important for us as a community to come together. And I think that's been the theme of today. Tearing down silos, working together, integration, collaboration. So what we did is we established an equity foundational knowledge and a shared consciousness as a group together, to have a shared consciousness so we can look at the problem from a similar lens. So leaning on my empathizing, leaning on my experience and being around each other, working with those that are working under your leadership, as well as being leaders on their own on their own. So we meet monthly, 90 hours. Sometimes it feels like 90 hours, but I mean, we have great teachers and great support, and I do want to thank our TA team and those that attend. It's super helpful to allow me to even stretch to be in this role. This is definitely not a comfortable position to be in. And so what we do on those monthly meetings is we actually are learning right now. We're currently learning about the frameworks. So how to operationalize them, how to look at those gaps that you were talking about, like taking a landscape perspective of what's there and looking and identifying gaps where we can work together and address or mend some of the gaps or fill some of those gaps. We have also created a charter. And this is something that I think, we want you to be proud of along with us, is this is the first of its kind. So there isn't another interagency council on homelessness that has a charter that's been constituted and a living entity focused on racial equity for public policy, funding, and also, I can't read my own writing, y'all, sorry. It's groundbreaking, and we just really want you to celebrate with it. The charter reflects the values of the council that has been articulated and displayed, even in this room today. And so what we've also been doing is we've been thought partners with the state funding state funding and policy working group, we provided critical insights and recommendations to incorporate racial equity into funding policy decisions. Advisory committee the advisory committee, we work with them as thought partners, offering guidance to inform committee's recommendations to council that reflects racial equity principles. And then the homeless data integration system team reached out to us, and we provided them with with a lens of racial equity around the policies, not policies, but data analysis, sorry. And so I know it's been a hot mess, and thank you for your patience and your understanding. It's been a struggle to work through it, but we are here to work with you, alongside you, to be those thought partners and to be the conduit and allow the voices that we hear that I work with. I do community engagement in San Francisco. I hear firsthand on the ground how things are. And I think it's really important to make sure that while we're making policies, making decisions, that those voices are lifted up and are in the room. So with that, I will gladly hand over the mic.
Thanks, Earl. So the racial equity work group, some top priorities have been identified. And one of those priorities is to establish a structured pathway where departments could make requests to the racial equity work group for input. And also to create a proactive pathway where maybe the racial equity work group could see some things and identify areas that might be potentially of interest to departments. So it'd be a two-way pathway. Also, upon request of either the council or departments, the racial equity work group could conduct reviews of existing or planned tools, plans, policies that to really look at them and to try to identify and address any barriers that really could really impede action toward obtaining racial equity progress and to really achieving all of our goals. And then to act as a central resource hub. So when your departments are working on things, it would be a place where they could find best practices, training and guidance on implementing racial equity strategies. And then also on developing mechanisms for holding partners accountable in racial equity initiatives that are infused in the plan so that we're actually seeing the implementation side of the action plan. Thank you. And then the racial equity work group has been, we've explored as Earl mentioned and as mentioned before, we've begun exploring the racial equity frameworks to look at and determine which approaches are best to integrate into the action plan relative to each goal. And then we are, as it was mentioned earlier, developing a racial equity implementation hub that will be a resource in guiding and supporting state departments in the application of the frameworks. The racial equity work group is tasked with infusing racial equity considerations into the language, strategies, and actions of the action plan to ensure it addresses systemic inequities, and will act as an accountability partner and a support mechanism for departments and agencies as they implement the action plan and work towards their racial equity commitments. And
I'd like to open up for questions. I just want to say one thing around the collaboration and the integration and being bold and what we were talking about earlier. I learned something was in prison from one of my fellow, I don't want to call it prison, I call it vacation. So one of my fellow vacationers told me that, you know, he was really into the words, right, in language. And he said, what is the root letter of community? like the root, not the root letter, the root word of community is to commune, right? To bring together. And what's the root word of communication? And so it just really stood out to me the value and the importance of shared language. And I think that's how we can get to a solution when, you know, a lot of times language could be a barrier, and it can also be, it's also a symptom of white supremacy. It can be a gatekeeping tool. So I just wanted to say that I feel the spirit of community and the work that you're doing, and we look forward, and our group looks forward to working with you on some of these solutions. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions. Thank you.
Thanks to you both. And I just want to say a couple of things that I want to make sure the committee knows. Hats off to Cal ICH for their thoughtfulness. We spent how many months, Lori, in the month? 3 months? There was a pre-implementation, 5 to 6 months before the group even formed. There was a pre-implementation committee. I was a part of it. Some people that are not a part of the actual work group, I wasn't supposed to be a part, but I couldn't let it go. So that's why I'm on the work group. But literally, we spent 5 to 6 months developing what this group would look like. So I just want to underscore the thoughtfulness. It wasn't just thrown together. There was a lot of, because we don't want to continue to repeat putting stuff together. Cal ICH was very mindful and thoughtful of the fact that this needed to look different than what every other initiative looks like. And so 5 to 6 months were spent just figuring out what should this look like. And we have spent the last 9 months doing foundational work. And so I just want you all to understand it's when we are trying to model what we're asking the departments to do. And the other thing that I don't think you all said that I just want to highlight is we intentionally had a community-based co-chair because we're also, a lot of the racial equity dynamics are about power, as Dr. Lamont mentioned. And so we're trying to even demonstrate how to share power, which is, it's intentional that there's a state representative and there's somebody from the community. So I just wanted to underscore those things, that everything that we do is really thoughtful. And I know that racial equity is an initiative to many of your departments and things that you're doing, but I just want to offer that it has to be ever present in everything that you're doing, given the example that we just had, given the reminders that Dr. Lamont just showed us around literally overrepresentation or disparities represented across the board for BIPOC people. And so I just really hope that you all will lean on us, because there's been a lot of thought. Cal ICH, you know, we were led by Lori and Lamont, and it's just been a really intentional experience, more so than usually in the public sector we ever even get time to do. So I hope that you all will remember that racial equity has to be at the ever present in every conversation that you have. Otherwise, we won't move the needle. The disparities will persist, and we will not reach the goals that we have. So thank you for your presentation. I just want to offer those 2 additional pieces of insight that I don't know that were clear to everybody.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so it's 17 total, and there's 10 representatives of government agencies and 7 community members. And the thoughtfulness that went into the design was, you know, the reason why I'm here in the first place is that I'm a Black man who experienced both housing instability and in the carceral setting. So having that unique lens and that voice in the room was, there was value to it, and that's super empowering for me to be an example to others, to come back in the community and offer some assistance and be a community member itself. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, I think this presentation is music to my ears. It's something I think about every single day as a person living in America, experiencing my privilege and still watching people struggle. So I just, not only is it clear about the thoughtfulness, but I want to just encourage council members to really think about how we can, as we've been talking about all day, connect the dots across all of the agencies that are doing equity work. The governor did sign executive order on equity a couple of years ago. Within our agency, all of our departments report on their equity goals. We have a community of practice. So I would love for this working group to be able to connect with that community of practice to really understand what's happening across the entire administration. And I don't take this last two bullets lightly, that the action plan should really be informed by the work of this work group. So it's not just your insights. I actually want to understand from Cal ICH, have we disaggregated our data? Do we know what the inputs are for different communities and populations who are experiencing homelessness? Like, how do we get a regular account of what are we actually doing to try to put some of this work into practice? And so I think I look forward to staff guiding the council and how we can do that regularly, so that it's not just something we hear about when you all present to us, but that we are really seeing the integration of the work in the action plan goals. So I'm deeply grateful for all of your work, staff and our co-chairs and all members of the working group. Thank you.
So thank you so much. That was super helpful. And I definitely see, the utility of kind of us engaging at a deeper level, thinking about not just principles and framework, but what does that look like in the actual design and delivery and evaluation. So I guess maybe a logistics question, right? It looks like it says that you all will serve as the implementation hub and knowledge source. Would that be like an actual like a curation of information on a website or somewhere where it's much more of like a one-on-one type of outreach and response?
We are just getting ready to move into that next phase right now. So it's really, I think, a critical time. All this work has been done to get us to this point. And I think that actually moving and taking that next step is really critical, because that's, in my view, what's going to make a difference in the long run, is pulling all this together and then actually implementing it in the programs that we all operate each day and in the design of.
And I think what would be most helpful, as we are studying the next few months, our role is to support the racial equity work group in designing what the implementation of is. So what would be most helpful? Could we hear from you all? And what is it that you would like to access? Would you just like written material? Would you like to have time where you can actually dialogue with the racial equity work group? Do you want the racial equity work group to come and speak to your department around a specific policy? Like, what is it? And then we can see where we can actually go with the capacity and the resources that are available. But if you had a magic wand, how would you want to interact with the racial equity work group and the implementation? Again, it's about the implementation of your racial equity goals that you're setting forth in your bold goals around preventing and ending homelessness.
So I can definitely, I can get started with what immediately, what comes to mind for us, right? So community colleges, when you think about Prop 209, there's always this challenge around how do we support a reduction of equity gaps in higher education in general, right? And then housing certainly is an important vehicle to support that. So I think for me, it's really twofold. Like, one is kind of framework to a deeper level around some of those general principles in program design, right? What does that look like? So then it provides us with some time to sense make, and then in many ways to think about what that adaptation will look like for our programming, for our system. And then I think maybe more of a robust conversation, right? Then go into the nitty gritties sometimes, from data collection, right, all the way to a continuous improvement, and also what's new out there that has been evidence-based that we potentially have not had access to. So like more robust conversation, but it's really both and, right? How do we have some initial concepts that allows us then to engage in that thinking?
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you can see my hand raised here via Zoom, but this is Kim Johnson, Social Services. Just also building on that, would just say, would love for the group to lift up best practices at any level, whether they be local, State Department, whatever you're seeing out in community that you highlight and feel like they got it. Would just appreciate that. And as a department who has had an Office of Equity established for several years now and has been working on disaggregating data and having dashboards, more accountability and transparency about progress, just want to again appreciate the focus, especially in this space where the disparities and disproportionality is so clear and the history is so clear. So I just really wanted to appreciate all of the presenters and all of those participating on this group and this effort to really activate all of us and being intentional on how we're addressing inequities for all of the Californians experiencing them. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I want to just say thank you to the council for modeling what this interaction can look like. I think it's important to hear what you have to say. It helps to guide us to create what the hub is going to look like, what accountability looks like, and how we work together. Are we at time? Any more questions? Thank you so much.
Amazing. My least favorite thing is talking after anyone from the racial equity working group presents, because it's every meeting is like this. It's like it wasn't just a presentation, it's like it all feels like that. So just a big thank you to all of you for coming to present, for being so thoughtful in the design of that group. I feel like the racial equity working group is really the model for the way we want to be creating these types of group at Cal ICH, right? The LEAB, which is the Lived Experience Advisory Board, the advisory committee, our other working groups, right? We want to use those groups as the resources that they are to understand from their perspective what the best ways to move forward are, right? How to implement policy and utilize their knowledge and their work as that resource. We also, part of the work is to build up our resource library on the Cal ICH website so that the things that they're pulling out and highlighting, right, are not lost forever, but that they live in a place that is easily accessible to everyone. So that's another piece of this work. The theme of today, in addition to being bold, is being on time. So just big thank you to everyone. It's 1 hour is never enough with you all. 90 hours wouldn't be enough with you all. So just really big appreciation and thank you all for your engagement and your thoughtful questions as well. So I will now pass it to Claire to facilitate general public comment.
Thank you very much. All right, we will now accept general public comments. Thank you all for your patience, and we appreciate council members staying and listening to all public comments as well. We welcome all comments and feedback, but due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions. If you have any questions for Cal ICH, the best way is for you to email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. Everyone will get 2 minutes for their comment. A Cal ICH staff member will soon share a timer with a 2-minute countdown, and that we will let you know when your time has expired. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon. And for those joining us by phone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. And then once I call on you, you will press *6 to unmute. And also please state your name for the record. Okay, do we have any in-person public comments? No? Okay, we will go to online. Okay, Eric, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone.
we're waiting.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Eric Tars. I'm the Senior Policy Director at the National Homelessness Law Center. And I really appreciate the discussion that was just had from the Racial Equity Working Group. It seems like you folks have put a lot of effort and thought into this. And my question really is, based on everything that you just said, what is the interaction of that Racial Equity Working Group and the work that all the other agencies will be doing in connection with Governor Newsom's executive order on encampments. This order does not seem like it was developed in partnership with folks with lived experience. It does not seem like it was done with thought to the consequences that are going to be deeply racially inequitable. If we know that homelessness has a disparate racial impact, this policy, which promotes sweeps of homeless encampments without requiring that people actually be housed or sheltered, is only going to disrupt their lives, and it has already resulted in a number of communities passing new laws criminalizing homelessness or strengthening laws criminalizing homelessness based on the governor's favorable assessment of the grants pass decision in the executive order. And so how can the Racial Equity Working Group, how can this whole council use the power and privilege that you have to provide that sort of analysis and critique of the governor's executive order? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, we will now move on to Janelle. All right, Janelle, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm calling from the far north from Humboldt County, and I want to make a little suggestion that may have a big impact. Up here, I've been trying to get people to do a campground, but I'm interested, housing first is so important. And the thing with housing first is that people have tenancy. So I've been advocating for campgrounds with tenancy. And I call this emergency housing because it's not a shelter, it's not really housing. And it also goes along with the shelter crisis codes, which could be used to do this. However, there is one problem with them, and that is that I learned this from a staff member. They talk about shelter, the section 8698.4. And I sent a document to you. All that needs to happen is some word changing, and emergency housing could be used. Right now, 984 allows the codes and things to be used for shelters. It could also be used for emergency housing. And that's why I came today. And thank you all. It was a wonderful meeting. Amazing that so many important people are here to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Eve Garrow, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, Eve, we'll come back to you. All right, Christina, you have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Ochoa, and I'm speaking on behalf of the ACLU of Southern California. In light of the governor's recent executive order, we urge the council to carefully consider any guidance and issues to state and local governments regarding unsheltered encampments to ensure it aligns with evidence-based best practices. Working with individuals in unsheltered encampments requires approaches that are both humane and effective. Individuals residing in these encampments are some of the most vulnerable members of our population, and without ensuring that our approaches protect their safety and dignity, we risk continuing to marginalize their position. Specifically, guidance should call for governments to avoid harmful displacements and punitive criminal measures that make it harder for people to get off the street. Focus on providing individuals in encampments with voluntary access to permanent, safe, dignified, appropriate housing. Ensure that people's rights are protected, including property rights, due process, and disability rights, and expand access to affordable housing. The lack of affordable housing and stagnating wages have created a housing crisis that disproportionately impacts Black Californians. Guidance should reflect this reality and take steps to ensure that any policy or guidance does not further these racial disparities, especially in criminal contexts of arrests and tickets. By utilizing these approaches, there can be a focus on addressing the root cause of people losing their homes, rather than continuing to penalize people for situations they could not avoid by destroying their property or using criminalization measures that take away their dignity and agency. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comment on this issue.
Thank you very much. Okay, Eve. We'll try again.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Eve Garrow, a policy analyst with the ACLU of Southern California. Along with our coalition partners, the ACLU SoCal has deep concerns about Governor Newsom's executive order on encampments, as well as the governor's recent rhetoric that fuels a trend toward increased criminalization of unhoused people around the state. As members of Cal ICH, you are in a unique position to issue guidance to local governments and the state, ensuring that all government interactions with unhoused Californians are humane, respectful, helpful, and treat some of our most economically distressed community members with the dignity we all deserve. Unsheltered houselessness is a result of decades of policy failures. In California, it is an economic, racial, and housing justice issue and an urgent humanitarian crisis. Our top priority must be to meet the health, safety, survival, and voluntary housing needs of our unsheltered neighbors, not to displace them. We urge you to issue guidance that instructs the state and local governments to avoid displacements and focus on providing voluntary trash collection and hygiene supplies to unhoused residents until permanent housing is available, equitably address the racially disparate impacts of encampment policies, not use law enforcement and anti-camping codes to address unhoused encampments, protect the property and due process rights of all unhoused people, comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ensure that encampment responses are transparent and well documented, and expand access to affordable housing, the most effective, humane, and evidence-based response to houselessness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Ludmilla. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead. Ludmilla, I'm going to come back to you because the microphone icon is also not showing, so there might be some difficulty on your end, so I will come back to you. All right, Kathleen. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Kathleen Crowley, and I'm Executive Director of the Recovery Institute. And I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing and the really thoughtful presentations and discussion today. But one word was used a lot, goals. And I think California should be long past goals. There's been endless planning and studies have been funded, billions of dollars spent, countless lives lost, and we're still measuring output and talking about goals. It's like pouring endless supplies into a sinking boat without ever plugging the hole in the boat. In reality, what should be happening is every contract should include specified outcomes and the supports and tools necessary to measure those outcomes, and incentives should be provided. To quote Carl Jung, you are what you do, not what you say you'll do. I've sat in on these meetings for decades and they all sound great. The reports all sound great. Beautiful words all put together. But California really is not collecting the data, disseminating the data, measuring outcomes. They're not even specifying outcomes often. So to give these huge contracts without any understanding of what success will look like and how it will be measured, we will continue to fail. That's all. Thank you again for all that you all do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to come back to you. Ludmilla, are you able to unmute? Okay, we'll still come back to you, Ludmilla. Okay, we've got Ishbaku. And please pronounce your name for the record. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ishvaku Vashishta, and I am an attorney at Inner City Law Center located in Skid Row, Los Angeles. Inner City Law Center has deep concerns about Governor Newsom's executive order and the recent shift towards a criminalization of unhoused Californians. I'd like to urge this body to promulgate guidance to state agencies and localities throughout California to ensure both that the rights of the most vulnerable Californians are being upheld and that we are not engaging in practices which, rather than alleviating homelessness, actually make it worse. As part of my work, I operate a vital document clinic in Skid Row. The clinic exists to help unhoused folks procure their vital documents because without them, they're obstructed from being able to access essential services like their Medi-Cal benefits and Social Security programs that exist specifically to alleviate the burdens of poverty. Oftentimes, folks in Skid Row are losing their vital documents, among other important belongings, to encampment sweeps and the criminalization of their very existence. When folks have their vital documents taken and are unable to access services, it doesn't make it any easier for them to get housed. It just makes it much, much harder. This is merely one of many extremely harmful aspects of the criminalization of houselessness. It's over 100 degrees today in Los Angeles, the hottest day of the year, and the sweeps have not stopped in Skid Row. Notably, folks that are being displaced were not offered water, much less any other resources. These practices, the ones called for by the governor, not only raise serious concerns about the rights of unhoused Californians, they also risk exacerbating the crisis. By issuing guidance that reflects an understanding of the data-proven strategies that actually work to address houselessness, I believe that this body can help bring about a compassionate and effective response for a housing crisis. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Betsy, you have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Betsy Montel here, policy analyst for community services at the League of California Cities. First of all, thank you everyone for the work that you all do around homelessness, and especially thank you to Dr. Green and Mr. Sims for those powerful testimonies. There were some comments made in the room around involving more local voices. I'm interested in just knowing more about the efforts and outreach on who those local voices are and where throughout our state they're located. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Patrick. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. We can hear you.
Okay, my name is Patrick Hogan, and I'm not affiliated with anybody. In fact, I'm living a homeless life right now. Nothing I really enjoy. However, in listening to what I came in kind of late, but listening to what I've been hearing, let me just give you some of my personal experience within the last 6 months. Okay. Actually, about 8 months ago, I was on the side of a hill on Caltrans property, in which the CHP came in and wanted to destroy everybody's stuff, just plow it all under. We stopped them by insisting that they have posting up, which is what they're supposed to do, along with blah, 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 and storing your stuff. Well, they stored my stuff. In fact, all the stuff that I had that I couldn't carry, they put them in a bag, and then he went and threw it away. And now they're claiming that they're not responsible for it, and it's not their responsibility. Now, there has to be some kind of oversight with all this stuff. The shelters do the same thing. I know a gal who, she goes into her shelter and her stuff is all removed and she's been exited, but they never told. Now, there is no oversight for these places at all. And if you look at our politicians, you've got a guy who's being investigated by the FBI because his daughter got a nonprofit and siphoned off $10 million. Now, this kind of money that they're putting into this homelessness and to fix it, there's no fix at all. the fix is it's like the old fix in the con game. And in the meantime, hundreds of people are dying. We had over 500 die last year, and agencies won't even know how many died because of the way the county counts the way people die, and when they're homeless. If you die in a hospital and you're homeless, you're not homeless. You died at an address. So I just want you to consider all those things and think about what you're thinking about is great, but what has to be done is you have to hear from what's going on in the field. You want to know you want to know how people in the field who are out there? Ask them. They'll tell you. I think that's all I got.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Okay, Ledmilla, we'll try one last time. All right, Ledmilla, I apologize, but it seems that I'm not able to allow you to, well, I've unmuted you, but it doesn't seem to be giving me any kind of microphone symbol that you're able to talk. So please reach out to us and we can pass on your public comment to all of the council members. With that, I see no further hands. And I would like to thank everyone. The council staff will take these suggestions into consideration for future council meetings. And now I will turn it over to Megan Marshall to close out our meeting.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much, council members, members of the public. I'll keep my closing comments very brief. Just one more time, and thank you so much to folks from our Racial Equity Working Group. Earl, you did better than I do with the microphone, so. And with that, this meeting is adjourned at, and it depends on the clock, but let's call it 1:06. Thank you all so much. Oh, 4:06. Well, it felt like 1:06. It was a fast meeting. Thank you, folks.